For many centuries, London was a dangerous place. It was a magnet for the very worst kind of people. Jack the Ripper dominated the headlines. But he wasn't the only killer around. Murder was afoot. The fear of death was everywhere. But police had their work cut out to track the culprits down. In this series, we'll be investigating some of the city's most notorious and intriguing crimes.
The female defendant.
Sexual intrigue, vicious murder, as well as the latest technology, fed the nation's insatiable desire for gruesome stories of London's dark side.
My name is Edith Jessie Thompson. I live at 41 Kensington Gardens, Ilford.
Your age?
28.
Are you married?
Yes.
What is your husband's name?
Percy Thompson.
How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Thompson?
Affectionate?
And has that always been the case?
Yes.
Edith Thompson and Frederick Bywaters. In the roaring 20s, everybody knew their names. But while their notoriety might have faded, the murder case they were involved in leaves us fascinated and appalled almost a century later.
There was a lot of anxiety that socialism, even communism, might hit Britain. There was the unrest in Ireland. You'd had the Easter Rising. You'd also got protests going on in Egypt and India. So there were a lot of anxieties at governmental level about what could happen.
Some of the attitudes were changing in relation to women in particular, because before the First World War, there'd been the suffragettes, and then women did men's jobs. And after the war, then there started to become a time when women were generally getting more freedoms.
One of the most important social changes of the time was that women over 30 were given the vote. There was also a great sense of relief that people had actually survived the war, so there was a sense of wanting enjoyment. So this is when we get the dances, the Charleston, the Foxtrot, and you get the flapper girls.
Flapper really referred to a young woman who didn't have the vote, so a woman under 30, who represented modernity, the future, all that was new, mobility in every kind of sense. She was someone who wore androgynous kind of clothes. So on the one hand, she represents the future and all that's exciting about the future, but she's also seen as possibly quite immoral, suspect. So there's anxiety about the flappers.
Women were starting to drive cars, smoke cigarettes, wear short skirts. They were becoming more liberated. It was one of the things that was happening that people were slowly getting used to.
Edith Thompson was a young woman who'd done very well for herself. She came from a low-middle-class background. She grew up first in Dalston, then Manor Park. Her father was a clerk. And she was very clever, sharp and attractive, and she got work in a wholesale milliner's called Carlton and Pryor. And she had a meteoric rise through the war, and she was very efficient, very good at her job, and she was one of the manageresses. So she did enormously well.
Edith and Percy shared a love for theatre and music hall, but whereas Edith had a particular love and talent for dancing, Percy was unadventurous.
They courted for about 6 years. I mean, she met him when she wasn't yet 16 and he was 19. And then they finally married in January 1916 when she was just 22.
When she married him, a lot of young men were going to war, a lot of young men were being killed. And so, although she sort of fended him off for a time, eventually she agreed to marry him.
He never was called up because he was deemed unfit to serve. He possibly pretended that he had this heart complaint. He was obviously quite a cowardly man. Goodness knows why she was with him, because she was immensely attractive, life and soul of the party, and probably could have had any young man.
Edith was shrewd and enjoyed male and female company. Her husband, by contrast, was stolid and unimaginative, even morose at times. Edith's childhood dreams of great love were suffocated by humdrum reality. Despite her burgeoning career as buyer and bookkeeper for Carlton and Pryor milliners, Edith was restless.
Hello, Edith.
Ready? How you've grown.
Can I take it back?
Oh.
By this time, he was a merchant sailor and his ship would dock at East India Docks. And so Freddie went round to her parents to say, could I lodge in your place? And every Friday, Edith would go and have supper with them. And so she met him. And I think there was, from all accounts, immediate attraction.
The attraction seems to have been there right from the beginning. She was clearly dissatisfied with her husband, who by this time, sort of the end of the working day, was retreating from the bedroom with a bottle of whiskey. So Edith inevitably started sort of looking for consolation. And there he was, this young lad, 18 years old, and he offered her the consolation that she wanted.
The handsome Freddie was very different to her husband. The hypochondriac Percy had avoided service in the First World War with a minor, perhaps manufactured medical complaint. He certainly boasted of his cowardly actions afterwards. By contrast, Freddie ran away from home when he was only 15 to join the merchant navy and sail the world, where he suffered the very real threat of German U-boats. He saw exotic, far-flung lands that Edith could only dream about or read about in her books. He was physically fit. He loved football and boxing. In the summer of 1921, Edith and Percy went on holiday to the Isle of Wight. Edith's sister Avis and Freddie joined them.
At the time, there was hope from her parents that Freddie was interested in Avis, and Avis was certainly interested in Freddie. And I think no one realised that there was this attraction going on between Edith and Freddie, but nothing had happened as such. But on the Isle of Wight, they managed to get time together, and they had their first kiss, and they declared love for each other. So that was really the start of what became an incredibly passionate affair.
On their return, Edith encouraged Percy to take in Freddie as a lodger. He agreed.
Taking lodgers was quite a common practice. It made sense for Frederick to move into the house, so it wouldn't have been uncommon for him to take accommodation as part of his wages.
Percy initially really got on with Freddie and had no inkling there was something between his wife. So Freddie stayed there for about 3 months. Then things got difficult.
It's getting cold.
She'll be here.
It's nearly past. You said 4.
We'll just wait a little while longer. Can you do that?
I don't mind. Fine.
We'll all have cold tea then.
Percy,
No. Mustn't bother little Avis.
leave her out of it.
Always bowing and scraping to your family.
She's my sister.
Yes, and I'm your husband. And this is my house.
Your house! But who paid for it? Some man you are.
Hey! Do not speak to me like that.
Lay off her.
You keep out of it.
Are you all right?
I said, keep out of it.
You ever touch her like that again, you'll have me to deal with.
I want you out of my house.
In the weeks after Freddie's departure from the house, he and Edith continued their affair, but this time outside the home. Percy suspected, but could prove nothing. And then, on the 9th of September, 1921, Freddie went back to sea. Edith's only lifeline to him was the letters she wrote.
Frederick went to sea, so he'd be away for 6-week intervals. And Edith would write these letters almost on a daily basis. There would be points when she'd say, "Do you remember that first kiss on the bus at Shanklin?" And so all her letters survived, and it kind of chronicled the affair.
Edith was the most extraordinary letter writer, nearly 70, which were found in a box. She wrote mainly, actually, sort of literary criticism of the books that they both read. She would do this incredibly sophisticated analysis of the characters in this book, but she weighs up the morality of these people.
She was a prodigious writer with a vivid imagination. She confided everything to him, from critiques of the latest books she was reading to timings of her period, from erotic fantasies to her daily routine. Elsewhere, she wrote ridiculous fantasies about murdering her husband by sticking shards of glass in his porridge.
She was sending cuttings about murders that were being committed using different sort of poisons, and all of this would seem to be egging him on to commit murder.
Freddie was completely aware this was a fantasy. She wrote this because letter writing, as she put it, was her way of talking to him. If it looked as if he was actually trying hard to get rid of the husband, he would be very pleased with this. It was clearly a level of fantasy. Of course, this was wonderful ammunition for the prosecution.
Freddie was growing concerned, however. The intensity of her passion, he worried that it wasn't good for her and urged her to think less of him each day. Freddie's letters became less frequent, much to Edith's distress. From the affair nearly ending, now their love was rekindled with a new intensity. It was a matter of days before Freddie was due back at sea. However, something was about to happen that would change the course of their lives and be discussed for decades to come. 3rd of October, 1922. London is cold and damp. Edith and Freddie meet for lunch. She feels guilty. She has plans for the evening she can't get out of. She has to go to the theatre with her husband, her aunt and uncle. Then she joins her husband and accompanies him to the Criterion, where they watch a farce, The Dippers, and they all leave the theatre at 10:45. As the party are making their separate ways, Freddie is leaving Edith's parents' house after dinner, where he's been with some old friends. His imminent return to sea looms large in his mind. The reality of his situation is brought into sharper focus. Percy dies on the street that night. A distraught, confused Edith is taken home. She barely seems to realize that her husband is dead.
Freddie was about to go back to sea, and he knew that they'd gone to theatre, and he'd had a drink or two, and suddenly his jealousy and fury about Percy, I think, overtook him. And in the heat of the moment, he draws a knife. He stabbed him a number of times and then ran away.
It's late in the morning on the day after the attack when they come to Edith to take a statement. She lies to the police. She doesn't mention seeing Freddie or anyone else attack her husband. And shortly afterwards, she's taken to Ilford Police Station for further questioning.
Tell me about the incident.
We went to work as normal. We said we would meet at 6:15.
Where?
At Aldersgate Street. We then met my aunt and uncle at the Criterion, the theatre. This silly play was on. We left the theatre at about 11, the four of us. We were all getting the tube from Piccadilly Circus. Percy and I went on to Liverpool Street, and then we caught the 11:30 train to Ilford. It arrived about midnight. We then started walking home as normal.
What route?
Along York Road, then Belgrave. We had just got to between De Vere and Ensley Gardens. We were walking on the right-hand side, and then Percy went into the roadway. I went in after him. He fell up against me. He was staggering, bleeding.
From where? Where was the blood coming from?
His mouth, I thought.
You did not see anyone else? No other person was present?
I can't remember seeing anyone. There certainly wasn't anyone when he fell up against me, I know that. I got hold of him with both hands, and I helped him over to the wall. He stood for a minute or two, and then he slid down onto the footway. He never spoke.
And where were you at this time?
I fell down onto the ground with him.
You did not shout out or scream, or... You cannot remember?
No.
I see.
Percy had been stabbed several times, and one of the wounds was a serious wound in his neck. Edith ran for help to the neighbours. A doctor came, examined Percy, who was at that time in a bad way.
Edith clearly had no idea this was going to happen. She was absolutely horrified. She was saying, "Oh no, don't," you know, and people could hear this.
I got up off the ground and I ran along to Cortlandt Avenue. I was going to call Dr. Maudsley, but I met this lady and gentleman first. I told them to get a doctor, that my husband was ill, something like that.
Words to that effect.
The gentleman said he would go. There was this whole crowd by the time the doctor arrived. He took so long. He had a look at Percy.
And?
And he told me he was dead. An ambulance came, took him away. I didn't. They took me home. 2 policemen. They took me.
Do you know a man named Frederick Bywaters?
Yes. Yes, I've known him several years. We were at school together. Well, we weren't. I wasn't, I mean, but my brothers were. Freddie works on ships now.
Freddie?
He's away a lot at sea.
Do you see him when he's home?
At my parents'. He visits my family. He's always done that. He was at school with my brothers.
Yes, you said. Mr. Bywaters was a lodger of you and your husband for a period last year, was he not? From the 18th of June.
He came as a paying guest.
Yes.
He paid 25 shillings a week.
I see. Well, he was with you from June the 18th till the beginning of August, 1921.
Yes.
That August bank holiday, do you remember?
Yes.
That weekend, did anything happen?
It was nothing.
Well, you quarrelled with your husband, did you not?
It was an argument. It was nothing.
He did not throw you across the room?
I knocked over a chair.
He did not hit you? Freddie Bywaters rescued you, did he not?
He intervened.
Well, on your behalf. Why do you suppose he did that?
I don't know.
He was angry with Percy.
He was trying to help.
Well, Percy was angry too. He told him to leave.
I don't know.
He kicked him out.
It wasn't like that. Freddie and Percy were friends.
No, Bywaters did leave, though. Did he not?
Yes.
So something must have happened.
It was just an argument. They were friends.
Edith maintained her story, but tongues had been wagging. People had realised that Edith was carrying on with Frederick Bywaters. And Frederick was then arrested as a suspect. They saw each other at the police station, and when Edith saw Frederick was also being arrested, she sort of became very emotional and then admitted that it was actually Frederick.
It was when we got to near Ensley Gardens. A man rushed out and knocked me and pushed me away from Percy, and I hit my head. When I got my senses back, I saw Percy. He was scuffling with someone, a man. I knew it was Freddie. I didn't see his face, but I knew. He was wearing his blue overcoat, the grey hat he always wears. He was running. I didn't want him to do it.
Once it was admitted by Edith that Frederick was the assailant, Frederick could no longer maintain this defence of it not being anything to do with him. So he then said that he had been approaching Percy, really saying to him, "Why don't you agree to a separation or a divorce so that Edith and I can be together, because you know that's what's going to make her happy, and you're being very unreasonable." But he said then that Percy had threatened him with a gun and that he'd had this knife and he had to defend himself. Well, there was no gun found, and that was fictitious. So even his second defence didn't really have any credibility.
At 8 p.m. on Thursday, the 5th of October, the lovers were charged with the murder of Percy Thompson.
These are addressed to Mr. F. Bywaters. Do you recognise them?
Yes.
Is that your handwriting?
Yes.
Did you usually exchange letters with Mr. Bywaters?
It was a habit.
It's an unusual one for a married woman. These letters are affectionate, Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And Mr. Bywaters' replies, are they couched in similar terms? Where are those letters?
I don't have them.
You have not them hidden away somewhere? Because Freddie kept his?
I burn them, but that is my custom.
I see.
I burn all my letters. I'm not hiding anything. That's my custom.
Your husband knew then? He was aware of the correspondence? He consented?
No.
No. This is not just the letters, is it, Mrs. Thompson?
No.
You do not just see Freddie at your parents'.
No.
The two of you, on occasion, meet when he is home. Is that right?
Yes.
Without your husband's knowledge?
It was a habit.
What's interesting about the press representation of Edith is before the letters have come up, there's a lot of quite positive portrayals of her. She's presented as very fashionably dressed. They talk about how she looks and how wonderful she is at dancing. They quote people saying what a wonderful businesswoman. So there's a positive representation. Once the letters start to be quoted, it all shifts.
I don't think she did have a chance. What we have here is the older woman seducing the younger man, the man just out of his teens. And I think that was the sort of shock reaction.
The fact that she is a modern woman who dares to have sexual agency, I mean, I think this is part of her downfall.
The Madame Farmy case was quite a cause célèbre in its day. But who she was and what her background was a mystery.
Nobody knew really much about her past until after the trial. It turned out quite the scandalous background to her.
Marie was a French woman who had worked as a prostitute, and she married Ale Farmy, who was a millionaire Egyptian. And they came to London in 1923 and stayed in the Savoy Hotel. When it went to court, she bought the leading defence lawyer of the time, Marshall Hall, who was a brilliant theatrical performer. He argued that Ale Farmy was about to pounce on her.
Marshall Hall hunched himself over, put his hands out, twisted his face. He was like a demon. He got the gun in his hand and he advanced on the jury like this, you know, sort of, this is how Prince Farmy behaved. There was absolutely no evidence for this. The jury were sort of overwhelmed by this performance, and Madame Farmy, to everyone's astonishment, was acquitted.
For that to have come out would have been kind of very detrimental to the royal family and, you know, the upper classes generally. So she could well have had that hold.
school moralist, he referred to Bywaters as the adulterer, and, refusing to recognize that there were any women on the jury, referred to them as gentlemen throughout. The jury spent 2 hours deliberating. Most of this time was spent reading Edith's letters. The verdicts were returned. Guilty. They were both sentenced to death.
The morning of the hanging, she was in a terrible state. She was very heavily drugged. She was virtually unconscious. They had to drag her along there. Clearly, it was very disturbing for those involved in doing it.
I think it was probably one of those cases that led to people revising their opinion about the death penalty.
Edith's hangman, John Ellis, was utterly traumatized by her execution. He was convinced she would receive a last-minute reprieve, but she didn't. He would commit suicide almost a decade later. The story of Edith Thompson is a tale of nothing but tragedy. Grim and dark days of the Blitz, when the nation stood together against the evils of Nazi Germany, have always been a strong influence over Britain's image of its own character. London had to withstand 57 consecutive days of aerial bombardment. The city's inhabitants had to observe the strict regulations of the blackout, which made life so much harder for the German bombers, but also for the Londoners themselves.
It's difficult to imagine now what life was like in London in 1940, not knowing whether you were going to be alive the next day, the next week, which must have been very difficult for people to cope with.
By 1941, the city had a tremendous number of bomb sites and derelict sites. It was taking a real beating.
It wasn't so much the deaths that were the problem. It was the amount of homelessness, the number of people that were bombed out of their houses and ended up with nowhere to live, nowhere to go. They didn't know where to turn. They didn't know what to do about money. They didn't know what to do about their possessions. And so there was a lot of chaos.
There were supply shortages to exploit, empty and bomb-damaged homes to loot, and huge numbers of young men to entice with drink and prostitution. From 1939 to 1945, crime rose by over 50%. An undermanned police force struggled to cope. It was, in the words of one gangster, a criminal's paradise.
There was this great darkness at night, which gave opportunities, if you like, for people to commit crime.
People didn't know whether they were going to live, whether they were going to die. They didn't know how to behave. They started doing things that they'd never done before. So behavior became unusual. Behavior became extreme.
The blackout was tremendously exploited by criminals because with the sound of falling buildings, breaking glass, the criminals went out at the beginning of a raid. They were going to risk the bombing because they could now start blowing safes, blowing in doors, smashing windows.
The blackout concealed darker crimes too. In 1942, Harry Dobkin, a fire watcher from South London, was convicted for the murder of his estranged wife, Rachel. Having vanished the previous year, her body was discovered months later among the ruins of a bombed-out chapel, At first, she was thought just another victim of the Blitz. The police soon revealed his deception, however, and Dobkin was hanged for his crime in January 1943. But his was not the only act of murder disguised by the blackout. For crime was able to thrive in this blacked-out world. And there are no crimes more notorious than those of the Blackout Ripper. On the morning of Monday, the 9th of February, 1942, Detective Chief Superintendent Frederick Cherrell, otherwise known as the Fingerprint Man, was called to an air raid shelter where the body of a young woman had been found. Frederick Cherrell had been head of the Fingerprints Department since 1938, but despite his seniority, he still insisted on visiting crime scenes himself, always armed with his trusty magnifying glass. On her neck were the telltale marks of strangulation. To Superintendent Cherrell's experienced eyes, the pattern of bruises could mean only one thing. Whoever did this was left-handed.
Fred Cherrell was one of the pioneer fingerprint men. It was a very new science for the police, and Cherrell played an important part in the development of the fingerprint department.
It's something that we take for granted today, but it was under, Fred Cherrell particularly, where fingerprints and palm prints really became a recognised expertise. And he's one of the people who have really contributed very largely to Scotland Yard's reputation.
Fingerprint technology had come a long way since its first usage in the late 19th century. By 1942, the Met's Fingerprint Bureau had thousands of records on file. But records aren't much use without something to compare them to. All police had were the body and the woman's belongings strewn across the cold floor of the bomb shelter. These were sent to Cherrell's fingerprint department at Scotland Yard for further analysis.
The fingerprints had really started to be introduced into police work because sometimes criminals would come to court and it wouldn't be clear whether or not they had a previous conviction in another court under a different name. What Frederick Cherrell did was to establish a means of identifying single fingerprints found at crimes.
Cherrell and Detective Inspector Sidney Birch had little to go on. The woman's handbag had been recovered, but it contained no clue as to her identity. They began door-to-door inquiries, armed with a photograph of the dead woman. Nobody recognized her.
He was found on Wyndham Street, just around the corner from the shelters. All the prints of the victims.
The attacker wore gloves then?
It was a cold night.
No identity card?
DDI Clare has men going door to door. Someone will recognise her. Cast your line into the water enough times
and you catch something in the end.
Though tragic, the murder of the woman in the bomb shelter seemed another unremarkable case. Cherrell could have no idea, however, what was coming. Prostitution has been called the world's oldest profession. Well, It was certainly a profession that boomed in the war period. The fragility of life under constant aerial bombardment led to a fraying of normal social constrictions, and the influx of Commonwealth and especially American troops meant there was no shortage of potential customers. As today, it was a very dangerous occupation.
I think it's fair to say that prostitution has always been with us. It hasn't been unusual throughout history, and it wasn't unusual at this point either.
People were going to have a good time, because who knows, then tomorrow they might be dead. There was that kind of attitude, perhaps, which affected how people behaved.
Street prostitution didn't become illegal until 1959, so prostitutes, of course, were out on the street. And what they would do during the blackout to attract customers, they would use torches, flash that they were sort of available. They would use whistles. And, of course, the bomb shelters and the underground shelters and dark doorways, these were places where they could actually service their customers.
Fingerprint analysis of items found at the crime scene had revealed nothing. The killer had probably worn gloves, and they had little else to go on. But although they had made no progress in identifying the killer, one other mystery was soon solved. The police's door-to-door inquiries in the Marylebone area eventually identified the dead woman found in the air raid shelter as Evelyn Hamilton. She was a 40-year-old qualified pharmacist, originally from Newcastle. The post-mortem confirmed that she had been strangled to death. There were no defensive wounds on the body, only scratches on her shoes gave any hint of a struggle. Whatever happened to Evelyn Hamilton, it had been fast and unexpected. But what the police didn't know is that this would be the beginning of a deadly spree in Blackout London. The days that followed would test Superintendent Cherrell and the Metropolitan Police to the limit. They would soon be faced with ever more terrifying murder scenes and a frustrating lack of evidence to go on. But their persistence meant that any mistake the killer made would be quickly seized upon. When the press became aware of the string of murders, it would spark a frenzy across the capital as another Ripper had arrived in London. There was no time to lose. On the morning of the 9th of February 1942, the body of Evelyn Hamilton was assessed by Superintendent Frederick Cherrell of Scotland Yard, a man respected worldwide for his expertise in fingerprint analysis. But he had no prints to work on at this crime scene, only the contents of Evelyn's bag found next to a strangled corpse. But just as he began to work on this case, more news would arrive.
Fingerprint office. It is. I see. Thank you, Inspector. I'll be there shortly.
Across town, a terrible new crime had been uncovered. This crime, by coincidence, also involved a woman named Evelyn. On Tuesday the 10th, Cherrell hurried across town to the bedstead of Evelyn Oatley. What was to be found there would shock even a man as experienced as the superintendent.
What is that between her legs?
It appears to be a torch, sir.
Evelyn Oatley had suffered a brutal assault. Her killer had attempted to strangle her before cutting her throat with a razor. As she died, he abused her body with curling tongs and then ferociously mutilated her with a can opener. Once he'd finished, he left his cruelly improvised weapons on the bed.
Because there were more prostitutes, there were more clients, there was also more danger. This was not an industry that was policed in any way. It was absolutely spontaneous. It was absolutely responding to opportunity and to circumstance. And so there were a lot of dark incidents involving servicemen, involving prostitutes, involving women.
Opportunity and circumstance also fueled one of the Blackout's other social problems, that of looting.
Looting was actually a capital offence, and it was seriously suggested that looters should be shot if caught. This may be a partial explanation why the War Reserve constables were given rifles, not so much to shoot at the enemy, but to shoot at looters. The War Reserve was set up in 1939, and these were volunteers who would supplement the police on the streets.
We think today of gun crime as being a great problem in America, and the problem is always said to be, you know, because there's so many guns around, people use them. Well, this happened at this period as well. Young servicemen carried their guns even when they were on leave, and they used them. They used them in all sorts of different circumstances. So, for example, a young man came home on leave, saw his girlfriend in a shelter, lying on a mattress with another man. His instinct was to become furious and to open fire. There was another case where a young man at Oxford University had access to a gun from the shooting club who went mad and started shooting people in the quad. Shot one person dead, hit another. He was found guilty but insane, sent to Broadmoor. The fact is that there was a surprising amount of gun crime happening, and it was happening because there were a lot of guns around.
The large number of guns may have been unusual for the British population, but it would have seemed second nature to the influx of American soldiers who'd arrived in the country to fight in World War II. There'd be quite a cultural clash between the two peoples.
I think there were a lot of social changes taking place, and one was the Americanization of British culture. American movies, American music. A lot of people really didn't like it at all. They felt it was very cheap. They felt that it was very superficial and it had no place in a much richer British culture. But one unusual manifestation of this was what became known as the cleft chin murder.
One of the American GIs who found himself stationed in London was a man named Carl Hulton. He met an English girl, a striptease artist called Elizabeth Jones. There was an instant magnetism, but this attraction, however, would prove ultimately fatal.
I think she was probably impressed by this great American Army truck that Hulton drove, which was actually stolen. And she had this fantasy that she wanted excitement and a life of crime. She thought, well, perhaps they could be a bit like Bonnie and Clyde, I suppose.
Instead of tackling banks, their first target was a girl riding a bicycle who Carl pushed off the bicycle and took her purse. The second was a hitchhiker.
Hulton hit her over the head with an iron bar and left her by the ditch of a canal. They took her money and again went back in the truck to Hammersmith. Fortunately, the young woman survived.
After this series of petty crimes, Hulton and Jones decided they would profit more from the robbery of a London black taxi driver. The unlucky victim was a man named George Edward Heath, whose defining feature was his cleft chin.
They asked him for a ride to Chiswick, for which he charged them 10 shillings, which was a lot of money in those days for a taxi ride. Eventually, they asked to be put off, and Hulton had a loaded gun and shot him.
The two of them robbed him. They took his purse, they took his money, coins, identification papers, petrol coupons. These were all thrown out of the car, and they drove back to London.
The body was found sometime later. George Heath was identified. His car was missing, but they knew that it was RD 5353, and that was circulated to the police, who were on the lookout for it.
They were easily arrested. They were brought to trial. They ran a cutthroat defense. They both blamed the other one for what went on. Hulton was found guilty and executed. Jones was found guilty and sentenced to death, but she actually wasn't executed. Her death sentence was commuted, and actually she only died in the 1980s. But the public feeling of revulsion, of anger at these events was so great that graffiti started appearing saying that she should be executed, you know, hang her, started appearing on walls. And this was a very, very odd little case of these two people who had, you know, considered themselves gangsters. They wanted to live the American gangster lifestyle.
George Orwell even wrote about them in his essay The Decline of the English Murder, and wrote, "There is no depth of feeling in it. The background was not domesticity, but the life of the dance hall and the false values of the American film." He goes on, "Jones declared that she wanted to do something dangerous, like being a gun moll. Hulton described himself as a big-time Chicago gangster." He concludes by saying, "Perhaps it's significant that the most talked-of English murder in recent years should have been committed by an American and an English girl who'd become partly Americanized." The cleft chin murder appalled a nation that expected its citizens to band together in a time of war. But the Blackout Ripper case was a different beast entirely. 2 bodies had been found, and if the police couldn't catch the killer quickly, terror could return to the London streets, which hadn't been seen since the days of Jack the Ripper. February 1942. In the blackout of wartime London, the Metropolitan Police were investigating 2 murders committed over successive nights. The victims were Evelyn Hamilton and Evelyn Oatley. Having inspected both crime scenes, Frederick Cherrell was now analysing the instruments found at Wardour Street that were used to mutilate Evelyn Oatley's body. As of yet, there was no reason to think that the 2 murders were linked, but this was all about to change. The killer had left a clue. Cherrell discovered a greasy fingerprint on one of the objects taken from the murder scene. As he lifted the print, he noticed something.
Ah, Inspector. Sorry to bother you so late. No, I'm afraid no matches yet. But there was something. You heard about that business on Wardour Street? Yes, that's right. It's nothing perhaps, but it seems that was a left-handed job as well.
Inspector Cherrell finally had a bit of evidence to work with, a fingerprint of the killer. But now began the laborious task of going through all the records in Scotland Yard in the hope of finding a match. The police believed that if they could find a match, then they would be solving 2 murders at the same time.
The police were convinced very, very quickly, because of the way the bodies were mutilated, the weapons that were used, that they were linked.
The murderer had caused sort of particular injuries to the victims, so it was clear that there were significant things that they had in common with each other. So it was very clear that they were looking for one person who was extremely dangerous, was attacking women frequently.
Whoever the killer was, Cherrell could not find a match. For the next 2 days, no more bodies were found, but Cherrell knew a killer of such sadism would not stop of his own free will. Either the killer had died, moved on, or he had killed again, and the body lay alone undiscovered. Life continued in the capital as it always does, and on that Thursday night, 3 particular women prepared to leave their homes. One of them would not return.
Is someone there?
Mary was saved by chance. An 18-year-old night porter was passing by a doorway in St. Albans Street when he spotted the flash of an electric torch. When the young porter called out, the Blackout Ripper sprinted down the street, disappearing into the night. Mary was left barely conscious, but alive. The Blackout Ripper had been frustrated. He hadn't satisfied the overwhelming craving he had awoken within him. It urged him on. And so fixed was his mind on this one desire, he didn't realize he'd made a crucial mistake. Mary Haywood had survived an encounter with the Blackout Ripper that night. The next woman that he came into contact with was a prostitute named Catherine Mulcahy. They met in Piccadilly and traveled to her flat in Marble Arch. Once in the bedroom, he began to strangle her. She fought back and fled the apartment. Unsatisfied and driven by the desire for death, the killer returned to the streets looking for another victim. This time he would not be denied. Margaret Lowe did not look anything like the image of a typical prostitute. Other women who worked the streets agreed. She dressed too conservatively and spoke with too much refinement. They nicknamed her the Lady. The Blackout Ripper had been thwarted twice that evening, but Margaret Lowe would not be so lucky. Her friends and neighbors became concerned that they hadn't seen her for a while. Eventually, a call was made to Frederick Cherrell. He arrived to find a scene even worse than the one at Wardour Street. The killer had completed a frenzied attack. He had cut deep into the flesh of her thigh. Her abdomen had been ripped open, exposing her intestines and internal organs. The knife and the razor he had scavenged from the kitchen were left on the body. Once again, he'd improvised weapons found at the location.
What about the candle?
Found inside the victim.
They're right-handed prints.
I did notice.
You sure they're your man?
You are a right-handed man, aren't you?
Yes.
Let's say my fist is the candlestick, and this pencil here is the candle. How would you go about removing it? Naturally enough. But imagine there were wax around the base of the candlestick, holding it tight. You see? You had to use your other hand, your left hand, which is the natural thing to do for a right-handed man. But a left-hander, now,
would use his right.
Precisely. Right-handed prince.
Left-handed man.
Birch and Cherrell now had 3 murders to deal with, and the drive to find a fingerprint match was even more intense. Fortunately, the Fingerprint Bureau at Scotland Yard had been a leading innovator in this new science. But no matter how good the system had become, there was no guarantee that the killer had a previous record on file.
When the fingerprints were first started, they were used to actually identify criminals appearing in the court process. But some people thought it ought to be possible to take a finger mark left at the scene of the crime and then match it up. So they developed silver powder, which would be brushed on with a very soft brush.
You would have had to use tape. That would have been put on a glass slide. Then that would have been photographed.
Many of the major developments in the study of fingerprints had not actually been made in Britain, but in India by a man named Edward Henry, who devised what became known as the Henry classification system.
Edward Henry, who became commissioner at Scotland Yard, came up with the system that, according to whether you had a loop or a wall pattern on your fingerprint, and by looking at your thumbs and fingerprints, he actually worked out a way of classifying these fingerprints, and it ended up into 1,024 different categories and permutations, and that formed the basis for how police could store and retrieve fingerprint patterns.
At that time, you have points of comparison, similarity in arches, whorls and loops. It was a long process, but of course, within a very short time, you then get fingerprints being sent by wireless, and of course today, much more scientific.
Any luck?
Nothing in the records. Do you mind? It was a long shot.
Yes. One cannot help wondering what he might be doing tonight, though.
It's never best to think on that, Fred. We're doing all we can.
No. No, you're right. Let's cast our lines again tomorrow. See what we can catch. Yes, fingerprint office. Thank you. There's been another one, Birch. We're on our way.
Cheryl and Birch raced across London to a fresh murder scene. The Blackout Ripper was showing no sign of slowing down. How many victims would there be before he was finally caught? The Blackout Ripper had already killed 3 women. The bodies of Evelyn Hamilton and Evelyn Oatley had shown that the police were looking for a left-handed killer, but they were no closer to identifying their suspect. In the early hours of Valentine's Day, Superintendent Cheryl raced across London to Sussex Gardens in Paddington. The Blackout Ripper had struck yet again. The post-mortems conducted on Margaret Lowe and Doris Journet by Sir Bernard Spilsbury produced strikingly similar results. Both women had been strangled, a silk stocking around both their necks. As they lay dying, both women had been hacked and slashed with abandon. Those investigating the crimes were worried. If the killer kept up this pace, it would create public panic and a fear that the police were unable to stop the slaughter. Despite their best efforts, they were no closer to identifying the man. On Valentine's Day, however, the press reported the gruesome twin discoveries of Margaret Lowe and Doris Journet's mutilated bodies. Inevitably, the killer was nicknamed the Blackout Ripper.
In the early part of the Blitz, the press was very limited in what it could say about certain things. So even though this was happening in 1942, at a point when the war was starting to turn in the Allies' direction just for the first time, you know, there was still this sort of thirst, this hunger for, you know, a good old-fashioned murder story.
The newspapers picked up on this very rapidly, and I think the phrase Blackout Ripper came from the press, and it was really being reported as something that caused great fear, particularly for women who, you know, had to travel around in the dark. So you could imagine the extra fear of this man who was on the loose.
Even the Times was full of it, not just the more tabloid papers. So yes, the press were very happy to go to town on human interest, murder, crime stories, even though, you know, the war was going on around it, and you might think the war would be a much bigger story overall.
But no sooner had the story broken than it was nearing its end. After receiving so many calls to inform him of the discovery of further bodies, Frederick Cherrill was finally about to receive some good news.
Fingerprint office? What? How?
The Blackout Ripper had made a crucial error. It hadn't been at one of the murder scenes, but when he'd been thwarted in his attack on Mary Haywood. The night porter who turned up at just the right time to save Mary found a serviceman's respirator had been left behind by the assailant. It had the number 525987 printed on it. The night porter delivered the respirator and the injured Mary to the police station on Savile Row. Thinking at first it was just an assault they were investigating, no connection was made to the Blackout Ripper. But the police did contact the RAF and trace the respirator's owner. It was a young man named Gordon Frederick Cummins. He was 27 and had been in the Royal Air Force for over 6 years. Cummins was married, but he had a reputation amongst his fellows for drinking and womanizing. He was often out and furtively sneaking back in late after curfew. He was nicknamed the Count or the Duke because of his impeccable manners and claims of noble descent, but it was all a total sham. He was from a modest background in Yorkshire. None of his family suspected he had a darker side. After another night on the town, Cummins returned to his barracks early in the morning. The police were soon there too. They took him to West End Central Police Station where they questioned him about the attack on Mary Haywood. Cummins was charged with assault. He was soon under suspicion of far worse. In Cummins' quarters, police had found a pen personalized with the initials of Doris Journet. They also found a comb belonging to one of his victims and a cigarette case bearing the initials of another. They were certain they had their man.
Of course. Thank you for informing me.
On the 17th of February, the day before his 28th birthday, Cummins appeared at Bow Street Police Court to be charged with the murders. It was at this stage that Cummins was fingerprinted by Superintendent Fred Cherrill. He signed his name, Cherrill noted, with his left hand. Cummins' trial began on the 23rd of April, 1942. The case was interrupted when the jury was shown the wrong exhibit. The judge ruled that this compromised the jury's ability to try the case properly, and he dismissed them. A new trial with a new jury started a week later. Cherrill was to be a key witness for the prosecution. The defense's only hope was to discredit his testimony and that of the other experts involved.
What Frederick Cherrill did was to establish a much better way of linking up a finger mark found at a crime with a suspect whose fingerprints were on record. It was a careful crime scene examination by the fingerprint experts that contributed to a very large degree to that identification evidence.
Cummins appeared in his defense on the second day of the trial. He insisted on his complete innocence.
Cummins denied that he was the killer. He said the men he was sharing his billet with, they would often use one another's gas masks. They could all give one another alibis because they would sign into the register and then they would leave the billet down the nearby fire escape. But this alibi was quickly cracked. And Cummins doesn't seem to have been particularly liked by his fellow students. The evidence not only had Cummins at Evelyn Oatley's flat, inside his gas mask, there were sort of pebbles and stones and bits of ash which came from the bomb shelter where the first victim had actually been killed.
The defense was fighting a losing battle. The judge clearly gave more credence to the prosecution case, calling the fingerprint evidence an important, if not essential, link, and Cheryl probably the greatest expert on fingerprints in the kingdom. The jury retired to consider their verdict at 4 p.m. and returned just 35 minutes later. Cummins was found guilty and sentenced to death. He continued to insist on his innocence and appealed, of course, but that was rejected. London would be that little bit safer once again. The population of the capital, however, was still wary. Crime was still an issue, and although Britain, along with Allied forces, was on the attack against a retreating German army, the threat of aerial bombardment still lingered. These were turbulent times.
The Blitz was a real time of extremes. It forced people to behave in ways that they hadn't behaved in before. People behaved very, very well. They actually, found themselves with empathy for each other in a way they never had before. But they also broke rules, they broke laws, they pushed moral boundaries. So people were pushing out in all sorts of different directions, opportunities opening up for good and for bad. This was a time when people were pulling together at the same time as they were pulling apart. And it's a time that we really should remember as one of the most interesting and integral and formative periods of modern British history.
For the family of Gordon Cummins, the fact that one of their loved ones was a brutal murderer was probably too much to comprehend during this already mixed-up era. They started a mass campaign of letter writing in order to earn him a reprieve from the noose. The Home Secretary at the time, Herbert Morrison, received dozens of letters outlining supposed holes in the case. Those letters are still on file in the National Archives. Mr. Cummins himself enlisted the help of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Prime Minister's wife. All these letters received the same response. I have considered sympathetically and carefully all the circumstances of the case. I regret I have failed to discover any grounds which justify me in advising His Majesty to interfere with the due course of the law. Cummins, the Blackout Ripper, would indeed hang for his crimes. With all appeals exhausted, he was executed on the 25th of June, 1942.
Excuse me. I need to clean the room.
It was 1946, and the Second World War was over. Most of Europe lay in ruins. London had endured the relentless bombardment of the Blitz. The time had come to rebuild a home fit for heroes who were returning needing new houses and new jobs. Men were coming back who'd been trained to kill and who'd seen and done awful things. The society was grappling with the challenge of reintegrating them into a country forever changed. Adolf Hitler had committed suicide on April 30th, 1945, and Victory in Europe Day finally arrived on the 8th of May. Crowds gathered across London in joyous mood to see King George VI on the balcony of Buckingham Palace and Winston Churchill waving from Whitehall. Even the future Queen Elizabeth II joined in the festivities as she was allowed to wander incognito through the jubilant crowds. And just as the young Elizabeth would take on the role normally held by a man, so too did many other women at this time.
More women are coming into industry every day, and much more varied are their jobs. Indeed, today, women are tackling jobs that were thought impossible a few years ago.
Women's role in World War II was to replace men who had actually gone to war, which of course caused a problem at the end of the war when men came back expecting to take on the jobs that the women had been successfully doing for several years. It was the women who actually built Waterloo Bridge, and they were engaged in that heavy labour. They were replacing the men who were away at war.
But the country was now ready to return to peacetime after the most deadly conflict in human history. 1946 saw the London victory celebrations with military parades marching through the city and a nighttime fireworks display. But amongst all the cheer, some very dangerous individuals were lurking, and the burgeoning British press had plenty of sensational stories to report on.
Really, the early 20th century, it started to accelerate. After W.T. Stead started to expose scandals and things like that, it opened the newspapers much more to murder, and especially after the Second World War, because the British public became very desensitized to horror, because they were used to seeing bombed out sites, dead bodies. So murder became much more palatable to the British public. And of course, Fleet Street always mirrored what people wanted. The Kings of the Crime Reporters were a group called the Murder Gang. People like Norman Jock Ray of the News of the World, Harry Proctor of the Sunday Pictorial, later the Daily Mail, Duncan Webb, and they had enormous power. They were mini celebrities. Some of them were interviewed for the Picture Post and things like that, and they became like household names.
It must have been a relief for most of the returning soldiers to now be reading the newspapers rather than living with the fear of death every day on the battlefield. One serviceman, though, was returning to London, bringing all the savagery of the fighting with him. This man's charming exterior hid a dark and murderous psyche.
Now, I've been instructed by your solicitor, Mr. Neer.
Why shouldn't I plead guilty?
I beg your pardon?
Why should I not plead guilty?
You have a father and mother both alive. A younger brother too, I believe.
Mick.
Well then.
They keep asking to see me. The warders think I'm cruel for refusing, but I know they'd hate it. I've done enough to them, you see.
Who was Neville Heath? Well, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, there were a lot of people who had left the services and who had this sort of military bearing and had had many adventures in the war. Some people talked about their adventures and their exploits, and they were true. A lot of people, perhaps like Neville Heath, had a mysterious background.
Heath had a very lower middle class childhood, and he came from a very normal family. There were no major problems or anything. But from a young age, as a teenager, he showed criminal intent and really theft to start with.
Growing up, he always dreamed of being a pilot and joined the RAF when he was still a teenager. He always tried to act the consummate gentleman, inflating his background and spending money he didn't have. In order to escape bad debts, he went AWOL from the RAF.
It really started because he stole some mess funds while he was in the Air Force. So he went AWOL really to not face the music. He wanted the glamour, he wanted the image, Because, of course, at that time, servicemen were heroes, but he wasn't really cut out because he was anti-authority. He was really criminally minded from quite a young age.
I'd ring for refreshments, but the service here...
Oh, that's quite all right.
It's not exactly the Savoy.
Tell me about your first court-martial in 37. No, thank you.
You sure? Get all the smokes I need. Be pretty browned off if I didn't.
You were dismissed from the service, were you not?
The old buffers. It was a lark.
A lark?
Flew my plane under a bridge.
Really? Goodness.
It was a damn tricky thing, actually. Even to attempt it, you have to have real skill. I mean, be a real pilot. My superiors weren't so keen, of course.
No, I imagine not.
It was jolly good fun, though, mind you.
Neville Heath went on to have a lot more fun as he began a career as a petty criminal. But time after time, his golden looks and charm helped win over the authorities. It seemed with a ready excuse and the promise of future good behavior, Heath could wriggle out of anything.
He had all the wartime glamour, the blonde hair. He had the manner of a dashing pilot, a hero. He had that glamorous aura which attracted a lot of women.
He was somebody who used his appearance enormously. He was blue-eyed, square-jawed, dark blonde-haired, cleft-chinned, you know, the kind of Cary Grant thing, but with blonde hair. And he was also very elegant and very confident. And this is how he managed to hoodwink so many people.
He was a con man on quite a grand scale. I mean, the number of names he uses is Major Rupert Brooke, or else he's won the Military Cross. They're all facades behind which he can exploit a number of frauds. Heath and fraud are linked all the way through his career.
But his luck ran out, and he was sentenced to time in Borstal, an old-fashioned type of correctional facility designed to reform delinquent youth. Unlike most, he thrived in the environment.
Wasn't so bad, I suppose. I could still get my Daily Telegraph. Well, it's rather like being back at school. Housemasters and prefects and all the rest.
I understand the governor grew quite attached to you.
Old Jack Joyce, yes. Oh, he was a good sort.
He supported your application to the Air Force in 39, didn't he?
Yes, well, I was house captain, you know. Keeping all those receptions in line. Those were the novices, the new boys. I tell them, no cursing, no brawling, no acting the goat, not when I'm around. There were some real swines, but they knew where they were at with me.
Then, of course, the war came.
Yes.
You tried to re-enlist, and the Air Force rejected you.
Bloody ministry bureaucrats did. Such pull. You'd think, outbreak of the war. This great battle approaching. They'd need all the good pilots they had, but no. No. They were up there and I was down here. One of their best pilots, packed and ready. God, it was maddening. It's a damn miracle we won that war.
Heath would eventually achieve his ambition and make his way into a cockpit after a truly remarkable journey across the globe. But by the time he finally returned home at the end of the war, he had transformed into a truly vicious individual. No one was safe while Neville Heath was allowed to roam free. Neville Heath had dreams of flying with the Royal Air Force, but those dreams had been dashed due to his troubling behavior. In September 1939, World War II had broken out, but Heath was rejected by the RAF yet again. He joined the far less glamorous Royal Army Service Corps as a private instead. He was stationed in the Middle East, but was soon court-martialed for the second time in his life and sent home in disgrace aboard the SS Multoon. But when the ship docked in South Africa, Heath seized his chance and escaped. The country offered him a new beginning. He eventually volunteered for the South African Air Force under the typically grand name of James Robert Cadogan Armstrong.
Neville Heath had a very checkered military career. He was court-martialed 3 times for using cheques, defaulting on payments, misuse of uniforms and medals. So there was this mix of glamour and fraud throughout his career.
It was really in South Africa where he started to show his future modus operandi, and he posed as numerous people there. His first persona was Captain, Selway, MC, Military Cross, and he would really inhabit the role. He had a limp, he had an eyeglass. He was really an actor.
Heath's acting skills had worked well for him in South Africa. He even achieved his ambition of flying missions during the war, but his true identity was soon revealed, and in January 1946 he was deported back to England. On his return to the UK, he saw one glimmer of hope, the London School of Air Navigation. He intended to become a commercial pilot. He studied hard and excelled, passing all the exams required for his license, but then his previous mistakes ensnared him once again. His court-martial and dismissal from the RAF was discovered. Heath was told he could not become a commercial pilot.
I've made a few slips in life, yes, all chaps have. But the Air Ministry refused to let me forge ahead. There was no reasoning with them, none at all. These congenital idiots. I swear, that's what led to all this. I worked damn hard for that license.
And after that, what did you do after their refusal?
I just drifted around for a fortnight or so, until the 20th.
Heath hid the failure from his parents. The only things he had left now, the only things he was good at, were drinking and womanizing. He would pursue them both in an increasingly extreme manner. And it would prove deadly for one Marjorie Gardner. She'd been born to a good middle-class family in Sheffield, but was now living in London. She was a talented artist, but always struggled for money after being separated from her unreliable husband. She was now in an on-off relationship with an alcoholic.
She worked as a film extra from time to time. She's said to have something of a bohemian lifestyle.
Her life went into a spiral, and she was really at the mercy of men she met.
She clearly enjoyed the new freedoms offered to women by the war and was drawn to the bright lights of the city. You might call her a good-time girl, but she certainly wasn't a prostitute.
We left the pub at about 8, I suppose, and then went on to the Normandy for dinner. Do you know it? It's in Knightsbridge.
I'm afraid not.
We must have left at about 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock. Then we took a cab to the Panama Club. I'm a member there. We sat down, just the two of us, and had a few drinks. We must have left at about 20 past midnight.
And returned to the Pembridge Court Hotel.
Someday we'll build a home on a hilltop high, you and I, shiny and new, a cottage that two can fill.
Do you remember anything of what occurred in the room?
No.
Nothing at all?
I woke up and she was lying there. I don't remember anything else. I've already told you all this. You know exactly what happened.
Heath may have claimed he was unable to remember what happened with Marjorie Gardner in room 4 of the Pembridge Court Hotel. But her body told the truth of what horrors had occurred. The post-mortem was performed by noted pathologist Keith Simpson. It showed that Marjorie had been the victim of a savage attack. She'd been bound and probably gagged. 17 whip lacerations were found on her body, and bruising showed she'd been punched in the face at least twice. Given the extent of her other injuries, we must hope that these blows knocked her out, because she was then subjected to the most horrifically violent and sadistic sexual attack. Her suffering was eventually ended by suffocation, probably with a pillow.
It was extremely violent, a brutal, frenzied attack. She had lacerations, she'd been lashed with a whip.
From a police point of view, one of the interesting things was that there were wheals across her back. And these marks or scars had a peculiar diamond pattern. And when the pathologist was discussing the case with the detective, he said, if you can find that weapon, then you'll have your man.
Neville Heath would prove a difficult man to track down, though, given his extensive experience of travelling under multiple aliases. Numerous women would cross his path as he made his way around the country. One of them would meet a gruesome end. In 1946, Neville Heath had returned home to England after years abroad during the course of World War II. He had brought back all the savagery of the conflict with him when he murdered Marjorie Gardner at the Pembridge Court Hotel. But Marjorie hadn't been the only woman he brought back to his room. Just 4 days earlier, he'd stayed there with Yvonne Simmons, who'd been part of the war effort, just like Heath.
She was staying in London at the Overseas Club. She met Neville Heath, probably impressed by this military bearing, and he put himself over as a lieutenant colonel. He took her out to dinner and persuaded her to come back to the hotel room. They spent the night in the hotel room with nothing of a violent action occurring at all.
Heath had seen his new fiancée, Yvonne Simmons, off on the train back to her parents in Worthing after they spent the night together at his hotel.
She was a pretty thing. Tall, slender. I think London rather dazzled her. You know these small-town girls.
Not quite as you do, I imagine.
You're from London, though, aren't you?
Wimbledon.
Oh, my parents live there. Cambridge man.
Oxford.
I always cheer the other lot during the boat race, I'm afraid. I fancy you were a bit of a rower, though.
College 8, athletics 2 for university.
Truly?
Yes, a long jumper a long time ago.
I don't foresee much long jumping in my future either. Short dropping, perhaps.
Not if I have anything to say about that, Mr. Heath.
The morning after he murdered Marjorie Gardner, Heath was on the run. The police would soon be on his tail, though, as he had signed into the hotel under his real name. He was travelling to Worthing to see Yvonne and her family. The amorous young man charmed her parents at the local golf club and then whisked her off to a dinner dance. The charming, war hero, charismatic facade showed no hint of the callous killer beneath. But events were playing on his mind, and after more drinks at a club after dinner, he told Yvonne a terrible secret. There had been a murder in the room they'd shared at Pembridge Court, he said. A woman had been killed.
Heath was doing everything to not tell Yvonne that he was with another woman. So he said he met a man who asked him for his hotel room key because he wanted to entertain a young woman. And he said he gave him the key. He completely cut himself out of the murder. And he was able to do that because, as well as being a psychopath, Heath was almost definitely a sociopath.
The next morning, newspapers were full of police appeals for Neville Heath to come forward. Yvonne and her parents were shocked, or who wouldn't be?
The hunt began for Heath. And it's at this point Heath does something quite astonishing. He writes to the police, giving his name, and saying that he knew Marjorie Gardner. He'd been to the same hotel with her, but he'd loaned her the key to his room. Heath had then gone back to the hotel later on and found her in the room. And he said that he'd even got the whip with which the injuries had been inflicted on her, and he would actually send this to the police.
I think in Heath's delusional mind, because he spent so many years telling lies and being believed, I think he honestly thought that the police might believe him. I honestly do think that. I think that he thought his version might be accepted.
This letter may seem strange, but Heath had form for this kind of thing. Often, when committing crimes or indiscretions, he'd written these crawlingly exculpating letters afterwards. These strange common courtesies often seemed to help him get away with things, but it wouldn't help him this time. The police pressed on with their investigation. Meanwhile, Heath was having fun. Unbeknownst to police, on the evening of Sunday the 23rd of June, Heath had arrived at the Tollard Royal Hotel in Bournemouth. He signed the register under the name Rupert Robert Brooke and told the receptionist he would be staying a week.
Thank you.
By now, the police had tracked Heath as far as Worthing. There, they interviewed the manager at the Ocean Hotel, as well as Yvonne Simmons and her parents. But beyond Worthing, however, the trail was going cold. The Tollard Royal Hotel, where Heath checked in under this false name, Group Captain Brooke, was situated overlooking the beach. It's a smart hotel for the better sort. Just Heath's kind of place.
He met Peggy Waring in Bournemouth. She was a young woman that Heath was chasing, and he actually proposed to her at one point, but she refused. And there was really a cat and mouse game going on between them. She was playing hard to get. She found him attractive, but there's something about him she didn't quite trust. But they did meet several times in Bournemouth, and they sent each other letters as well.
So for about 13 days, Heath was on the loose, and there was no public identification of him. It's this point he meets a young girl called Doreen Marshall. She's 21.
Doreen had survived a terrible V-1 rocket attack that had reduced most of her street to rubble and killed 13 people. While her family escaped with their lives, the trauma left its mark on young Doreen, a burst of grey hair at her right temple.
Heath's version is that he was out walking in Bournemouth. He met Doreen Marshall and her friend, and then he struck up a conversation with them, and he arranged to meet Doreen later. She seemed to have liked him at first, but as she was becoming increasingly anxious because his behaviour was becoming very pushy. And the night porter of the Tollard Royal Hotel where Heath was staying witnessed her becoming a little bit panicky.
This would sadly be the last time anyone but Heath saw Doreen alive.
I have no recollection of going near the chime. Next thing I remember, I was lighting a cigarette. As I went to flick the match away, I saw blood on my hands. I'd left the hotel with her. I knew that. But where she was, or what happened, I was on the beach, on the sand. How late it was, I don't know. I didn't know what to do. I washed my hands in the sea and then walked back along the beach to the hotel. It was quiet. There was nobody about. I knew something dreadful had happened.
Doreen Marshall's sudden disappearance raised suspicions about the mysterious character of Rupert Brooke, who'd only just arrived in Bournemouth. The police, who were hunting for the killer of Marjorie Gardner, would soon realize that Neville Heath and Rupert Brooke were one and the same. When Heath was finally captured, his extraordinary and frightening life story would be revealed to both his legal counsel and a fascinated public, who were fed all the details by the burgeoning British press. Neville Heath was staying at the Tollard Royal Hotel in Bournemouth under the false name Captain Rupert Brooke. Doreen Marshall was at the hotel lounge as well, but she was now missing.
Captain Brooke?
When Heath went back to the hotel that night, he used a ladder to get into his hotel room. And when the porter came up to check, they saw his shoes there. And at breakfast the following morning, he told everybody that he'd played this prank on the doorman. But in fact, that created an alibi in his mind over what he had done and how he had attacked Doreen Marshall.
Fears over Doreen Marshall's disappearance were growing, and on Friday the 5th of July, the manager at the Tollard Royal Hotel received a telephone call from his counterpart in town at the Norfolk Hotel, where Doreen had been staying. She had last been seen in a taxi heading for the Tollard Royal.
The hotel staff at Bournemouth were very concerned about Neville Heath, or Group Captain Brooke, as he had signed himself in the register under. And because they knew that Doreen Marshall was missing, they knew that Heath had had some connection with her. They said, well, you really should go to the police, which indeed he did do.
The man police believed was Group Captain Brooke seemed a helpful witness. Calm, courteous, and upfront, with nothing to hide. There was no reason to detain him, nor any reason to think there was anything wrong with Doreen's disappearance. She was on holiday, after all, and might have made an impromptu trip. She was expected to show up eventually, but a certain resemblance was nagging at their memory.
Inspector Constable Souter actually had the photograph of Neville Heath, which had been circulated to the police forces, and said, well, actually, we want you to stay here just to check for a bit longer until my detective inspector comes.
The Bournemouth police were under pressure to release the man, though. Wasn't he a gentleman, an honest serviceman who'd given his word? Their superiors wanted him freed, but D.I. Gates couldn't shake the conviction that this was the man the entire country was looking for. All they had to do was delay long enough till the information came through. But Group Captain Brooke had already given them a bit of information they could look into. He had told the police he was from an aerodrome in Leicester. He even gave them the name of his chief, a man called Walters. Well, this was something they could look into right away.
Eventually, Reg Spooner from Scotland Yard came down and they identified Neville Heath as the man they wanted to interview and arrested him for the murder of Marjorie Gardner. In the course of searching Neville Heath, they found a number of things. One was a rail ticket that Doreen Marshall had used. Another in his luggage was the whip and some blood-stained clothing, and there was some hair on the whip that corresponded with Marjorie Gardner. And so it was very clear at that stage that Neville Heath was clearly connected and had possession of the murder weapon.
Spooner charged Heath with the murder of Marjorie Gardner. There was still, though, no sign of Doreen. It was the coverage of Heath's arrest in the press that helped lead to the discovery of the body of Doreen Marshall. A young waitress named Kathleen Evans thought she was just taking her dog for a walk. But the next day, when she read the papers, her mind went back to the strange swarm of flies she had encountered. She revisited the location with her father. They discovered the clothing and informed the police. Doreen's body was soon found.
It was found concealed in some bracken. She'd been stripped naked, her hands tied behind her back. She'd been savagely beaten. Heath had almost certainly stripped himself naked before the attack because there was so much blood. Then, having committed the attack, he'd gone into the sea, washed himself, and got rid of the knife.
Charged with the murder of Marjorie Gardner, Heath's trial began on the 24th of September, 1946. This wasn't his first appearance at the Old Bailey. It was here in 1938 that he'd been sentenced for robbery. But these charges were on an entirely different scale.
Why should I not plead guilty?
Mr. Heath, there is no kindness to your family in throwing your life away. A guilty plea is accepting that you were in your right mind when these murders were committed. Do you want it to be said that your parents raised a man to commit such crimes? Is that how you want Mick to think of you? And he to think himself as a child of the same parents?
Mick's different. He knows better.
But it's only human to wonder, is it not, what he too might be capable of? This is your opportunity. Your one opportunity. to prove to Mick and your parents that the man who committed these vile murders is not the real Neville Heath they know. That would be a true kindness.
All right. Put me down as not guilty, old boy.
Heath's counsel, J.D. Caswell, had developed a reputation for handling infamous murder cases that generated a lot of press attention at the time, but nothing quite like the story of the lady killer, Neville Heath.
I think the way the press covered Heath was wrong. I know for a fact that circulation of the Sunday Pictorial increased by about 40%. There was a massive interest in Heath, and it certainly increased Harry Proctor's stock in Fleet Street. Proctor really got the nitty-gritty of Heath's story from prison. You know, he spent time with him in prison, he spoke to him, so he got the exclusive. And Heath was very much shown as a lady killer in the jaunty way of that word. He was dashing, you know, he was the airman. He was almost seen like a Terry Thomas type character. But the problem is what he did was monstrous.
With the evidence against Heath so overwhelming, his defense did not deny that he was the killer. Instead, they claimed the murders were proof of insanity. They did not hide Heath's previous wrongdoings. Instead, they revealed them in court, arguing the crimes were steadily escalating ones, a progressive mania that finally led to murder.
I think he was faced with a situation that a lot of murderers would have faced, that actually they were facing the death penalty if they were convicted. If they could prove insanity in some form, then actually they stood a lot better chance of being reprieved.
You might think he was insane, but the thing is, in legal terms, he wasn't insane under the Norton rules, which states that you have to not know what you're doing is wrong at the moment of death, and that's very difficult to prove.
A number of people in his situation did actually try to plead insanity with, you know, a wide variety of different success rates.
And the problem with Heath was that he made so many efforts to cover up after both murders, and he told so many lies that it showed that he did know what he was doing was legally wrong, if not morally wrong.
Will you be calling me to give evidence?
I do not think at the current time that that would be our best course of action.
Concerned I won't see him mad enough for them, Mr. Caswell.
We're not contesting your involvement in the murders. It is a question of your state of mind, and on that we will of course present the jury with expert opinion from the most eminent authorities. A doctor has been recommended. He practiced psychotherapy at Broadmoor. I'm arranging for him to visit. He shall want to conduct several interviews with you.
Their key witness was Dr. William Henry de Barg Hubert, a specialist in psychiatry. It was a disastrous appearance. He ended up suggesting that all crimes are excusable if the person can't help themselves. Even Heath dismissed his own witness. He passed a note to the defense insisting he'd never suggested being excused on the grounds of insanity. Indeed, it appeared that at this point, Heath had a death wish. If so, the wish was granted. How do we account for the crimes of Neville Heath? His life had always been one of lies and scams, but somehow, whatever the scrape, he always managed to wriggle free. After the war, though, he became a deeply twisted and vicious individual. But he maintained his playboy facade to the very end. When he was offered the customary glass of whiskey to settle his nerves before execution, he calmly replied, "Under the circumstances, you might make that a double." John Christie stands as one of the most notorious killers in history. The case of the unassuming little man with a terrifying psyche remains debated to this day. It was a morbid tale that horrified the public, but at the same time spurred enormous press attention. A serial killer managed to wriggle free of the law as an innocent man was sent to the gallows for his crimes. In this two-part documentary, we will delve into the world of post-war Britain, where sensational murder stories dominated the headlines. London was home to a terrifying collection of killers. The acid bath murderer John George Haigh was on the loose at the same time as Christie. But as these killers were tracked down and brought to justice, attitudes towards capital punishment were being changed by the troubling case of Timothy Evans and the public outcry to the executions of Derek Bentley and Ruth Ellis. The times were changing indeed. Rillington Place would become one of the most notorious addresses in London's history. In the early 1940s, it was in one of the most run-down areas of the capital, Notting Hill. One of the tenants residing there at that time was John Christie. Christie was born in 1899 in a village near Halifax, West Yorkshire. He was from a large family and had a troubled relationship with his father. It was in adolescence, though, that Christie's sexual problems would develop. His impotence would haunt him for his entire life and may even be the cause of his violent and murderous behavior. His sexual failures soon became public knowledge.
You would meet girls and they'd have a snog and it would go further. He failed to perform several times.
He was called Can't Do It Christie or No Dick Reggie because as a young man he was unable to perform sexually. And the word got round, and so friends taunted him about his lack of sexual prowess. This was a reputation that clung to him for all of his life.
Perhaps eager to conquer his inadequacy with the First World War raging on the continent, Christie enlisted in the 52nd Nottinghamshire and Derby Regiment of the British Army. He was just 17. In the last months of the war, Christie was posted to France. Shortly after he arrived at the front, however, Christie was caught in a gas attack. Mustard gas was used extensively during the First World War. Although initially deployed by the Germans, by the end of the conflict, both sides were using the vicious chemical weapon against each other.
He'd been exposed to an attack of mustard gas, and for about 3 years or so, he could hardly speak. He lost his voice, and this was a problem which did come back to him from time to time.
Christie has said various things, but we don't really know for sure whether that really affected him. And certainly he was operating at a sort of fairly sensible level in various employments he had. So it wasn't anything that would bring him into the category of being anything other than completely responsible for his criminal actions.
Following the end of World War I, Christie married Ethel Simpson in Halifax, but their early years together had been unhappy. Christie moved to London alone in 1924, but almost a decade later, the couple reconciled, and in 1937, they moved into a flat in Notting Hill. It's a very fashionable part of London now, but then Notting Hill was very seedy and run down. The house itself, one day to be so infamous, was similarly dilapidated. Christie's prospects were not looking good either, as he had an extensive criminal record at this point. He had served time in prison for theft and violent assault. But when World War II came along in 1939, a new opportunity opened up for him.
During the Second World War, he was a War Reserve constable. So he was given a uniform. He patrolled the streets, calling out people's attention if the light was showing, warning on blackout, and that was his role.
He was somebody who needs to feel a sense of power. So he was very proud of his uniform. He would make sure it was absolutely immaculate. At that time, a special constable during the war in London had a kind of elevated status because people in the community looked to them for help, but he really used that to his advantage.
For perhaps the first time in his life, Christie was in a position of power. It transformed him, and he embarked on an affair with a co-worker. When the woman's husband discovered the illicit romance, he gave Christie a violent beating. Soon after, Christie carried out his first killing.
Ruth Fuest was from Austria, and she'd been a nurse, but she was working in London as a part-time munitions worker.
Ruth Fuest had fled to England after Hitler annexed her homeland in 1938. She was reported missing by her landlady, but in truth her absence was not otherwise much noticed. She was, after all, an unmarried foreigner who had lived at over a dozen addresses in just 4 years. She had no family in London and few friends. Given the war, it is perhaps not surprising that her disappearance was not investigated further. By 1944, Christie was already targeting his next victim. At this time, he was working as a clerk in a radio factory. It was here that he would first meet a new colleague, Muriel Edie. Knowing she was a hypochondriac, Christie preyed on her fears and wormed his way into her confidence. He convinced her that he had the medical knowledge to cure her chest problems.
Hello, love.
Hello, Mr. Christie. It's horrible outside. It goes right through you.
Yes, I've hardly been out all week.
You're feeling better now, though?
Oh, much. Much.
Because we missed you at work.
We can have a nice cup of tea afterwards. And you can tell me all the gossip I've missed. Come on through.
Mrs. Christie not home?
No, Ethel is out. Shopping. Why don't you take a seat there? That's right.
Is this it then?
No, don't.
Sorry.
It's quite all right. It's just a little sensitive, you understand? Now, this will be just the thing for your catarrh. Cleared my bronchitis right up.
It's very kind of you. I get so bad in this weather. I'm coughing all day and night.
Yes, the damp. Not good for the chest. Constricts the bronchial passages, you understand?
You have a word for everything, don't you, Mr. Christie?
That's what my medicine does. Unblocks those passages.
Smells a bit like Friar's balsam.
Are you prying into my secret recipe, Muriel?
Oh, no.
Well, it does share some common ingredients, but Friar's balsam doesn't have the really good stuff that's in mine. Now, are you ready? Just sit yourself back. Close your eyes now, Muriel. Just relax, that's right. Breathe, nice and deeply. You'll soon be able to feel it. That's it, just breathe. Breathe. Lovely.
It's nice, this.
Now, you might start feeling just a touch dizzy, but that's all right. You sat down with me. It's just a sign the medicine's beginning to work.
Mr. Christie.
Shh. Keep breathing. That's it. It's working. Breathe. Breathe.
As World War II was coming to a close, the murderous reign of John Christie was just beginning. He would manage to avoid capture for almost a decade, but when new tenants came to stay at 10 Rillington Place, his true nature was in danger of being revealed. John Christie had devised a sinister technique that would enable him to kill without confrontation or violence. That night, he moved the body temporarily into the washhouse at the back of 10 Rillington Place, before finally burying Muriel fully clothed in the garden beside his earlier victim. Unlike Ruth First, though, Muriel was missed. However, amid the flurry of V1 and V2 bombings that year, it was sadly assumed by friends and family that Muriel had been killed in such an attack. There was little investigation. Christie had escaped any suspicion yet again. The end of the war in 1945 should have brought some much-needed respite for the citizens of London, but the truth was, several other serial killers were on the loose, including the acid bath murderer, and a string of horrifying deaths were about to take place. In 1946, the chalk pit murder and the mysterious figure of Thomas Lee grabbed the country's attention. Lee had been a successful politician in Australia whose political opponents had a worrying habit of disappearing or apparently jumping off cliffs. Whilst in the UK, he and an accomplice had been convicted in court of kidnapping, torturing and killing a man and leaving his body in a chalk pit in Surrey. Lee was later declared insane and sent to Broadmoor. At the same time, the gruesome crimes of the lady killer Neville Heath also captured the British public's attention, but John Christie managed to remain undetected. In March 1948, new neighbours moved into 10 Rillington Place, a young couple named Timothy and Beryl Evans, who soon welcomed a baby called Geraldine. They would set in motion a chain of events that would threaten to expose Christie's crimes to the world and send an innocent man to the gallows. Timothy Evans was born on the 20th of November 1924 in Merthyr Vale in Wales. He had learning difficulties and was prone to tantrums. He often lied about his own life story in order to boost his confidence. That would prove an unfortunate trait when he was eventually accused of murder.
Timothy Evans was, in the terms of that time, simple-minded. He'd had learning problems from a young age. He was working as a van driver in London at the time, and he met Christie and his wife Ethel when him and his wife Beryl went to 10 Rillington Place, Christie's house, because they were looking for somewhere to live. And they went to view a room on the second floor.
The Evans marriage was a strained one. There were constant issues with debt, and it didn't help that both Beryl and Timothy were quite bad with money. Beryl became pregnant for the second time in the autumn of 1949, but their strained financial situation and their volatile relationship meant that the couple were considering an abortion. However, the procedure in those days was far from straightforward. This was a decision that wouldn't be taken lightly.
In working-class districts like this, if pills couldn't be obtained, standard method of abortion would have been a hot bath, a bottle of gin and a knitting needle. Gin was known as mother's ruin for that reason.
Women in that situation were at the mercy of backstreet doctors who were not always trained. And Christie's a prime example. I mean, he knew nothing about how to perform an abortion at all. He basically gassed her, like he did with some of his other victims, to put her to sleep.
Timothy Evans was strongly opposed to the idea from the start, but was persuaded by Beryl and eventually agreed to the procedure. They didn't have to look far to find someone who claimed he could carry out the operation. Initially, it seemed fortuitous that their quiet, unassuming neighbor, claiming to have a medical background, was more than happy to help. But for John Christie, this was an opportunity. Whilst Timothy Evans was at work, Christie prepared his formula, and like with Muriel Edie before her, he used coal gas to render Beryl unconscious.
Tim. Mr. Christie, how did it all go? Sounds quiet enough.
I think it might be best if we spoke upstairs.
What is it?
Why don't you go on up? I'll come behind.
Right.
Her stomach. It was septic poison, do you understand? Nothing could be done.
How long? When?
At about 3 o'clock. Another day, and she'd have to have gone to hospital.
What did you do?
What you asked me to?
I didn't ask for this.
You asked for my help, Tim. I did say there was a risk. She was septic poisoned.
What does that mean? I have to call a doctor. Someone. I don't know.
That's... could get me into all sorts of trouble, Tim. Just for trying to help.
Well, I can't just leave it lying there.
It could look black for you.
What?
Well, you and Beryl have been quarrelling a lot recently, and in the street. People will have seen, you understand? Tim, they will think that you disposed of her.
But I never wanted this. I told her, I said, I never wanted this. What am I going to do?
You need to remain calm, Tim.
But I said, and now I have to feed the baby.
Breathe.
What am I going to do, Mr. Christie?
Breathe. Nice and deeply. Now, tomorrow, you just get up and go to work as normal.
What about Geraldine?
I'll see about someone to take care of the baby. Don't you worry about her. You go to work.
I go to work?
As normal. Now, we're going to have to move Beryl. I've opened up Mr. Kitchener's flat. We can lay her down there for now. I know just what to do. I was a police officer during the war, and I know about these things, you understand? You need to be strong, Tim, for Beryl's sake and for the baby.
Yes.
Now, let's sort out something for Geraldine to eat, and we can have a cup of tea, yes?
Right. Right.
The murder of Beryl was just the beginning of the tragic tale of Timothy Evans. By exploiting Evans' weaknesses and inflating his own life history, Christie would meticulously take away everything Evans held dear, the outcome of which would see a miscarriage of justice which would have a deep historic impact. Timothy and Beryl Evans, along with their daughter Geraldine, had moved into a flat at 10 Rillington Place. But after becoming pregnant again, Beryl sought an abortion, something their neighbor, John Christie, was all too happy to carry out. Christie had no knowledge of such a procedure and instead gassed Beryl, physically abused her, and then killed her. Her lifeless body was discovered by Timothy Evans on his return from work. Little is known about the events which unfolded in that house during the days following Beryl's death. But Christie immediately began exploiting Evans' low intelligence. He manipulated him, preyed on his emotions of guilt, panic and anger, and filled his mind with alternate versions of events. Amongst this confusion, Evans fled back home to Wales, alone.
Christie managed to persuade Timothy Evans that he would be better off moving out and carrying on his life on his own and putting his married life and his daughter behind him in his memory.
He goes to Wales to family, and he gives various excuses as to why Beryl is not with him.
Timothy Evans continued lying about his life. He told some people that his wife and daughter had gone to Bristol, and to some others he said they'd gone to Brighton. On the 21st of November, Timothy Evans returned to London. He claimed it was to inquire after the welfare of his baby daughter, whom he'd left in the care of John Christie. Having received assurances of her welfare, he returned home to Wales. But stricken with guilt, on November the 30th, he went to the police station in Merthyr Tydfil and confessed that he had disposed of his wife. Evans was arrested on suspicion of murder.
He went to the police and told them that his wife had been put down a drain. The police went to the address and they searched the drains and couldn't find anything.
However, a later search led the police to a truly grim discovery. The bodies of Beryl Evans and baby Geraldine Evans were found hidden in the washhouse at the rear of the building. The other two bodies, buried in the garden, remained undiscovered. Beryl Evans and Geraldine had both been strangled. Indeed, the tie used to extinguish little Geraldine's life was still wrapped around her neck. Evans was transported to Notting Hill Police Station. His first moments there were defining ones. Still reeling from the traumatizing confirmation of his family's deaths, he was questioned at length by detectives. But the statement that emerged was radically different from his earlier accounts. His trial was to begin in just a few weeks.
Is your name Timothy John Evans?
Yes, sir.
How old are you?
25.
Did you strangle your baby daughter, Geraldine?
No, sir.
Were you in any way responsible for her death?
No, sir.
When did you first know that she was dead?
When I come to Notting Hill Police Station and Inspector Jennings told me.
Did you strangle your wife?
No, sir.
Were you in any way responsible for her death?
No, sir.
With respect to your daughter, Geraldine, which is the principal matter we are considering today, have you ever harmed her?
No, sir.
Were you fond of her?
Yes, sir.
In his third confession, made at Notting Hill Police Station, Timothy Evans had said he alone was responsible for his wife's death, and that he had returned from work on Tuesday the 8th of November, argued with Beryl, hit her, grabbed a rope, and then strangled her impulsively. But serious questions have been raised about this third confession.
He felt as if he'd lost his old life and he was in a corner, and he felt immense guilt as well for letting his wife have the abortion, which led to her death. Really, he was led by the police. He had a low IQ. He was very impressionable, and they were able to put him in a corner.
On a personal note, I was a policeman at one time, and I can remember the reading for the first time Timothy Evans' statement. And as I read it, I could hear my instructor, how you lay out a statement. And I can remember sitting there thinking, time, date, place, name, age, occupation, address. And as I went through the statement, I thought, the policeman's written this. Evans could never have written this. It's a policeman's statement. That's always stuck with me, that memory of reading for the first time Timothy Evans' statement.
Timothy Evans later changed his account yet again and insisted it was Christie who was responsible for the deaths.
Is it true that one evening, when you came home from work, Christie said he wanted to chat with you about your wife taking tablets?
Yes, sir.
And that he, Christie, knew that she was trying to get rid of the baby?
That's right, sir.
Did he say anything else, Christie, to you?
Well, he turned around and told me that if my wife and myself had gone to him in the first place, he could have done the job without any trouble at all, sir.
What did you say to that?
I told him I wasn't interested.
Where were you speaking? Where were you when this conversation took place?
In his front room, sir.
Did he say anything about his ability to do such a thing?
Well, he mentioned it, that he had done jobs with other young women before, sir.
Did he say whether he had been successful or not?
He said he had been successful.
He said he had been successful?
Yes, sir.
Did he show you anything? Did you ask him anything about his medical knowledge?
He has shown me medical books, sir.
He has shown you a medical book?
Yes, sir.
Can you read?
No, sir.
Can you tell my lord and the jury what was in that book that he showed you?
Well, it had diagrams of men and women's bodies, sir.
Did he say anything about himself with regard to his medical knowledge?
Well, he said that he had been training for a doctor before the war, sir, but had to give it up owing to an accident.
Did he say what sort of accident?
No, sir, and I did not ask him.
Did you ask him how he would bring about an abortion?
I did, but he would not tell me. He just said only him and a doctor would know how to do that sort of thing.
Police, however, remained convinced that they had their man. The hot-tempered, heavy-drinking, inveterate liar of a husband seemed a far likelier killer than the meek and bespectacled inhabitant of the downstairs flat. The key witness for the prosecution was Evans' apparently upstanding fellow tenant, John Christie. It was his first appearance at the Old Bailey in a capital trial. But it wouldn't be his last.
John Reginald Christie, what is your occupation?
Ledger clerk.
Do you live at 10 Rillington Place, North Kensington?
Yes.
You live in a flat on the ground floor, as shown in our plan. Is the first floor occupied when he is there by Mr. Kitchener? And the floor above, was that occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Evans and their baby girl?
Yes.
You knew them, did you, as neighbors?
Yes.
In the early part of November last year...
The backyard, is that common to all three flats?
Yes.
The other tenants of the flats have use of that backyard?
Yes, sir.
How did they get to it, Mr. Christie?
Down the stairs and through part of the hall to the back door.
Through your front door?
No, through the hall. And there is a back door leading into the yard. They pass our kitchen window, and it's the first turning on the left past there.
How would neighbours get to the backyard without coming through your flat?
They were self-contained flats. We occupied 3 rooms. They would come down the stairs from their own flats.
Well, so that the jury can see. They would come down the stairs in the middle of your flat.
Yes, and turn sharp left.
Turn left at the bottom of the stairs?
Yes, and then turn right and into the yard.
Is that back door kept open or unlocked?
Yes, unlocked.
So the tenants of the other 2 flats could get to the backyard if they wanted?
Yes.
John Christie gave evidence against him that he'd heard bumps and scraping as if bodies were being dragged upstairs.
He was extremely important. He pointed the finger at Tim from day one. You see, Christie, being a special constable, was seen as a safe pair of hands, trustworthy.
Nobody then knew the truth about Christie. Nobody knew of the 2 women he had already murdered and the victims yet to come. And nobody in court that cold week in January could have predicted the case before them would become one of the most controversial and debated of the 20th century. The trial of Timothy Evans began at the Old Bailey on Wednesday, the 11th of January, 1950. The police were convinced he had murdered his wife Beryl and his daughter Geraldine. Both had been strangled, Beryl with a rope and Geraldine with a striped tie found in place around her neck. Although Evans was tried for the murder of baby Geraldine alone, much of the evidence concerned the death of Beryl. John Christie was the key witness for the prosecution, but he also found himself on the defense. During the trial, he had to explain his own criminal background before the court.
Christie had more than just a dubious past. He'd previously been convicted of theft and beating a woman with a cricket bat. Timothy Evans' defense team hoped to highlight Christie's criminal past and portray him as the real murderer.
You were shown this tie at the police station, is that right?
Yes.
And you were asked if you recognized the tie or something like that? I understand you said no.
No, I did not recognize it.
Did you say anything to the police about the tie to connect it with Evans?
I think I did say that I'd seen Mr. Evans wearing a striped tie, but I could not say whether this was the one or not.
What is the point of telling the police you had seen Evans wearing a striped tie if you could not say if it was that tie or not?
But I was asked if I'd noticed what type of tie Mr. Evans used, and I said that I had seen him wearing a red one very frequently, but I had seen him wearing a striped tie. But what the stripe was, I could not recollect.
I see. Did you tell the police that it was not your tie? You're wearing a striped tie now, aren't you?
Yes.
Well, I've got to suggest to you, Mr. Christie, and I do not want there to be any misapprehension about this, that you are responsible for the death of Mrs. Evans and that young baby, or, if that is not so, that you know very much more about those deaths than you have said.
That is a lie.
You are not, are you, a man of good character?
Well, I had some trouble.
On 4 occasions, you have been convicted of offences of dishonesty, have not you?
3.
Then perhaps I had better put them to you. Were you sentenced to 3, 3, and 3 months imprisonment concurrent in 1921 for stealing postal orders? Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
Bound over for false pretences in 1923. Do you remember that? At Halifax.
Yes, I remember that.
9 months hard labour for stealing material and goods at Uxbridge in 1924.
Yes.
And 3 months imprisonment and various fines with an alternative of prison, again at Uxbridge, for stealing a motor car in 1933. Surely, Mr. Christie, you could remember that? 4 offences of dishonesty.
I had an idea it was 3.
Here we have a sort of a soft-spoken, respectable man who's seen war service. He's been a part-time policeman. He served in the First World War. So despite sort of minor offences, he would seem to be a good witness. And so he is accepted.
I think the main reason Christie was believed was his wife, because she did seem like a good woman. She backed up his story 100%, you know? And the fact that Tim and Beryl had argued a lot vocally, other people had heard the arguments, was easy to go that, you know, to make Tim look like the murderer.
Evans' defense team were unable to land a knockout blow against John Christie, though. The prosecution had little difficulty in painting Evans as the liar he clearly was. Even Evans himself seemed at times to become confused between his different confessions, and he could offer no motive for why Christie would kill his wife or child.
Is it true that on 5 different occasions, at different places and with different persons, you have confessed to the murder of your wife and child?
I have confessed it, but it is not true. I was upset.
Is it right that you have confessed it 5 times at different places and with different people?
Yes, it is.
Are you saying that on each of those occasions you were upset?
The biggest part of them, sir.
I beg your pardon?
Well, for the last one I was.
If you were not upset the other times, then why did you confess to willful murder, unless it was true?
I knew my wife was dead, but I did not know my daughter was dead.
What did that got to do with it?
It has a lot to do with it.
Is that a reason for pleading guilty to murder? Because you're upset because your daughter is dead by some other person's hand?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
I see. Let us just look at these occasions. It is you who voluntarily go to the police station on the 30th of November after you have read a letter from your mother to your aunt.
That is right.
It was because in the letter your previous lies had been exposed that you decided to go to the police, was it?
It was not because of the lies.
Why then did you suddenly go to the police?
I was worried about my daughter.
Are you saying that seriously to the jury? That you go to the police and confess to murder because you're worried about the whereabouts of your daughter?
The trial only lasted 3 days. The odds had been stacked against Evans from the very start. His habit of providing false testimony proved critical, and the jury produced their verdict in under an hour.
Timothy John Evans, the jury has found you guilty of willful murder. The sentence of the court upon you is that you be taken from this place to a lawful prison and thence to a place of execution, and that you will be hanged by the neck until dead, and your body buried in the precinct of the prison in which you shall be last confined before execution. And may the Lord have mercy upon your soul.
When the guilty verdict was delivered for Timothy Evans, John Christie burst into tears. Was it relief that he was off the hook? Well, for the time being at least. A devastated Timothy Evans made an appeal on the 20th of February. It was dismissed. There would be no reprieve for the young man. Timothy Evans was hanged on the 9th of March, 1950. When Christie's crimes came to light, doubt suddenly fell on the verdict. I mean, was it really conceivable that 2 stranglers lived under the same roof? What seems more probable by far is that in November 1949, John Christie, already a double murderer, added 2 more to his gruesome tally. The great tragedy of the case was the fact that Christie's first 2 victims were not discovered buried in the back garden when the police found the remains of Beryl and Geraldine Evans. The bodies of Ruth First and Muriel Eady lay buried just a few feet away. In fact, a femur bone was later found propping up a fence. This miscarriage of justice would cause debate for decades and form a major part of the push to end capital punishment. But on the 9th of March 1950, not only had one man been wrongfully executed, the real killer had got away scot-free. His terrible crimes were yet to be discovered, and more were to come. In Timothy Evans, Christie found an easy scapegoat. Police failings in the prosecution and the fact that the other bodies buried in the garden were somehow undiscovered meant that all suspicions surrounding Christie disappeared. He was now free to find new victims, and the events which followed would shock the nation. The murder of Muriel Eady gave Christie his modus operandi: poisoning, physical and sexual assault, and then strangulation. This sexual violence almost certainly empowered and intoxicated the usually impotent Christie. With the killings of Beryl and Geraldine Evans, 10 Rillington Place was already known as a house of death. But the notoriety of this address would only grow as Christie would find new prey. His next unwitting victim, however, would be very close to home.
If your lordship pleases. Members of the jury, it now becomes my duty to address you for the first time in the defense of this accused man, who, as I have already made quite plain, I hope, is not asking at your hands a verdict of not guilty. That has never been the position at all. He is asking at your hands, under the direction of his lordship, when you have heard all the evidence, that you return a special verdict of guilty of the act charged, but insane at the time. In other words, guilty but insane, as it is called.
John Christie is one of the most notorious serial killers in history, and one of the most despicable characters ever to have lived in London. We left our story with Christie breaking down in court at the sentencing of Timothy Evans for the murders which Christie himself had committed. Evans was hanged on the 9th of March, 1950. Christie had killed Evans' wife and child, and hidden them in the washhouse at the back of the building they all once shared. Suspecting Evans as the killer, the police searched the property and found the bodies where Christie had left them. He had developed a method of gassing his victims and rendering them unconscious before he would sexually and physically assault them. By 1950, he had killed 3 women and 1 child, and watched a man hang for his crimes. Christie would return to married life with his wife Ethel at the already infamous address of 10 Rillington Place. But this house of horror would become even more synonymous with evil as Christie continued his murderous journey.
John Christie had escaped detection for his first 2 murders. His 2 victims, Ruth First and Muriel Amelia Eady, lay buried in his back garden and had not been uncovered by the police when they were investigating Timothy Evans. Christie must have felt untouchable. On the 31st of March 1953, John Christie was apprehended by the police on Putney Bridge. Although on trial for only 1 murder, his other heinous crimes would soon be revealed.
When she was unconscious, I believe. I think I strangled her then.
With what? Do you know?
I think it was a stocking.
Go on.
I think I tried to get down beside her again and attempted to be intimate with her as I strangled her, and I couldn't. My back was so bad I just could not.
And that was up in her room, was it?
Yes.
And Mrs. Evans was then on the floor?
Yes.
And then you found she was dead?
Yes.
What did you do immediately? Did you move her at all, or did you leave her there?
No, I left her there.
Did Evans come back?
He came back in the evening.
And where was she then?
It was dark.
Was she still in front of the fire?
Yes.
After Timothy Evans' execution on the 9th of March, Christie tried to return to life as it was before.
Christie really went back to normal, as if nothing had happened. It elevated him in the community a little bit, you know, because he'd been in the papers and everything, and he played on that. And he played the victim, basically. Oh, terrible thing happened at Rillington Place. Oh, me and my wife got to get over this. And he also played on his arthritis and everything to get sympathy, you know, and his bad back and everything. But it pretty much went to normal. And but he didn't commit a murder for a while.
He and his wife Ethel continued to dwell in the downstairs flat at 10 Rillington Place, but their lives had been forever altered by the trial, and the neighborhood they lived in was changing dramatically as well.
It was actually pretty heavily racist, really. It was a time in the 50s of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. West London was mainly very poor white people and black people who just arrived in London from the West Indies. They were the ones who were at the mercy of the slum landlords. Poor accommodation, often dangerous wiring, damp, and people could be evicted very quickly, you know.
The Christies hated their new neighbors. They complained to the authorities of their, quote, dirty habits. And there were frequent arguments with their new landlord who had purchased 10 Rillington Place. The previous owner wanted rid of it following the trial of Timothy Evans.
I think Christie was disturbed because Christie was an archetypal Little Englander. He was from the north of England. He was very blunt. Although he was very softly spoken, he was very entrenched in his views. He was a coward and very timid, so he wouldn't have been openly racist to anyone. But I think, like many working class white men of that time, he had racist views.
John Christie, of course, was reluctant to move to another location. He always guarded access to the garden fiercely, for his two undiscovered victims, Ruth First and Muriel Eady, were not buried deeply there. Indeed, the Christies' beloved Irish terrier, Judy, had already dug up a thigh bone, and around the time of the Evans investigation had even uncovered a skull. Christie managed to dispose of that in a Blitz damaged building nearby. But it was clear that any new tenant taking over his flat and garden would inevitably discover the bodies. So John Christie was trapped in a house he could not leave, in a house where he had no control. Months passed, and all Christie's old anxieties and insecurities reasserted themselves more strongly than ever. He saw doctors for anxiety and insomnia, but they could do nothing about the deep and irresistible frustration that burned within him.
Christie, being the character he was and being the man of violence and sexual violence that it was, the relationship between him and his wife deteriorated. It may be that his wife realised what had happened about Timothy Evans being convicted and executed, and that might have been the reason why John Christie actually killed her.
He said she's suffering ill health and she was getting pills. He woke up one night and there she was, and she was sort of gasping and choking, and he didn't like to see her suffer, so he strangled her and put her under the floorboards in the front room.
You hid the body under the floorboards?
Yes.
And did everything you could to prevent everybody from finding it?
I suppose it looks that way, yes.
You knew it was there all the time.
Well, I did not want to be separated from her. That is why I put her there.
What?
Is it quite true what I said?
What did you say?
I said that I did not want to be separated from her. I did not want to lose her. That is why I put her there. She was still in the house.
He strangled her in bed. There wasn't a sexual motive. He really got rid of Ethel so that he could murder other women, you know, because she was the thing holding him back. He told neighbours, conversely, that she'd gone to visit her relatives in Sheffield, and he told the other neighbour that she'd gone to Birmingham.
Christie had quit his job at this point and lied to his neighbours that he had a new job waiting for him in the north and that Ethel had simply gone on ahead to make arrangements. He must have known the lies would unravel before too long, but that did not matter to him now. Christie was able to carry out an even larger killing spree. He had already murdered 5 at his home in Notting Hill, and the victims to come would ensure that 10 Rillington Place would always be one of London's most notorious addresses. John Christie had murdered his wife Ethel in the early hours of Sunday the 14th of December 1952. Ethel lay dead for 2 days until Christie finally disposed of her. He wrapped her body in a blanket, prized up the damp and rotting floorboards and shoved her into the space below. He had plans to explain her sudden disappearance. 2 days before he murdered his wife of 30 years, she'd written a letter to her sister Lily in Sheffield. She asked Christie to post it. Instead, he kept it. With her now dead, Christie put the rest of his plan into action. He changed the date on her letter and posted it off to Sheffield on the 15th.
Now look at the letter, Exhibit 11. When you wrote that letter, you knew your wife was dead and that you had killed her, didn't you?
Well, I must have done.
Well, let me read it to you. First part of it. Ethel has got me to write her cards for her, as her rheumatism in her fingers is not so good.
Yes.
Of course, that was complete invention, wasn't it?
No, not entirely. She had suffered from rheumatism for quite a long time. Her fingers were rather swollen up.
She had not got rheumatism then because she was dead.
Yes, that is quite true.
The doctor says she will be okay in 2 or 3 days.
Yes.
How could you possibly say that?
I don't know. I was just writing down everything that came into my head, I suppose.
Just writing anything that came into your head?
Yes.
I am rubbing them for her. Her fingers?
Yes. Well, I had been doing that for a number of years for her.
Well, that was meant to convey that you were looking after your wife very kindly, wasn't it?
Yes, it seems that way.
As soon as Ethel can write, perhaps by Saturday, she is going to send a letter.
Yes.
That was intended to deceive, wasn't it?
It seems so.
That was to keep the family quiet, wasn't it?
No, that was not a thought. That was never entering my head.
Because you knew you had done something wrong that you did not want to be found out.
No, I disagree.
He covered it up by writing to her relatives and saying that she had terrible rheumatism, she can't visit you, and she can't write to you. And that worked for a while.
You wonder what was going through John Christie's mind at this time, and you can speculate that actually he was on a downhill spiral, and he must have had some guilty feelings about how he had effectively sent Timothy Evans to his death through execution.
Christie may have been carrying around some sense of guilt about the hanging of Timothy Evans and possibly a modicum of sorrow after the murder of his wife Ethel. These 2 deaths, for which he was solely responsible, enabled him to kill freely, and 3 more women would fall victim to his desires. But Christie wasn't the only serial killer terrorizing London at this time. The capital was also being plagued by the crimes of John George Haigh, the acid bath murderer.
John George Haig was born in 1909. His parents were members of the religious sect, the Plymouth Brethren. And so he had, by most people's standards, a tough upbringing.
His childhood was extremely enclosed and isolated. His father built a big fence around the house. He wasn't allowed much contact. He was a choir boy. He was very controlled.
When he reached 21, he suddenly discovered there was easier ways of making money than working for it. This was when he began getting involved in crooked enterprises with cars and insurance, which would make him money.
He was one of these people who seemed to live in hotels and conduct a life of crime one way or another. I don't think he probably ever paid his hotel bills.
He went to prison for fraud. He showed no violence towards anybody. I think he turned to violence because he was a bit of a megalomaniac and he thought he'd invented the perfect way of killing. He cut out so many risks and not being caught. But what he didn't realise was you have to be careful that you don't kill people, that have people who care about them.
He came to notoriety because he was talking to Mrs. Olive Durand Deacon. She was a widow, aged 69. He said he was a businessman, and he had this idea for a new kind of artificial lady's fingernail, and she was very interested in that. I think he probably wanted her to put some money into the venture. So he offered to take her down to his business at Crawley so that she could see for herself. Actually, what happened was that he shot her, put her body in a 40-gallon drum of acid.
Haig had already killed 5 people and disposed of their bodies using this method by the time he met Mrs. Olive Durand Deacon. He had murdered a former employer called William McSwan, and then when the parents became concerned about his sudden disappearance, he murdered them too. Having run out of money due to his gambling habit, he then killed another couple and stole their possessions. But the disappearance of Olive Durand Deacon would finally bring his murderous reign to an end.
When Mrs. Durand Deacon was reported missing, the police were called and they interviewed Haig. The police were stunned. Haig said, yes, she did come with me, but you won't find her because I killed her.
They were concerned that they wouldn't find any trace of her. But the pathologist noticed an object which he recognized as a human gallstone. And actually, her false teeth survived, and so did her plastic handbag. Even though he had claimed that he could have disposed of the bodies with a guarantee of success, it wasn't so, and there were still these small items that were left from Mrs. Durand Deacon's remains.
He became a megalomaniac. He realised he was getting away with it, murder after murder, and nobody was arresting him. And this led to him thinking he could do anything he wanted.
John Christie must have had the same sense of invincibility as John George Haig after he'd escaped justice for his crimes and Timothy Evans had been executed. After Christie murdered his wife Ethel a little before Christmas in 1952, he was free to indulge the darkest side of his character. He concocted all sorts of explanations for his wife's sudden disappearance and began to search for other female victims. He would never have to leave the down-at-heel area of West London to find them and satisfy his violent sexual urges. He embarked on a murderous path to self-destruction, the outcome of which would shock the nation and uncover one of the most sensational miscarriages of justice of the 20th century. Childhood bullying and sexual repression had manifested themselves in an unassuming killer. 4 women and 1 child had already fallen foul to this monster. More were a certainty.
Christie picked up and murdered 3 women in the first months of 1953. Kathleen Maloney, Rita Nelson, and Hectorina McLennan. He killed them using the same method he'd used to murder Muriel Eady a decade earlier. First of all, rendering them unconscious with carbon monoxide, and then strangling them to death.
Now we turn to Rita Nelson. Do you remember Miss Nelson? Her photograph is an exhibit in the case somewhere.
Yes.
Where did you meet first?
Notting Hill Gate.
Notting Hill Gate. Where?
In a cafe.
Was she alone, or was somebody with her?
She was with a friend, a girlfriend. The 2 of them together. The cafe was quite full, and there was not much room, but there was a vacant seat at their table, so I sat with them.
Did you get to talk to her?
Yes. She spoke to me and asked me for a cigarette or a match. I'm not quite certain which. I think it was a cigarette she asked me for. And then she kept the conversation going, and, well, she said they were looking for some different place to stay, to live.
Looking for accommodation?
Accommodation. And so it was then that I suggested that there may be room at my place, that I may be leaving, and they decided to come down. They arranged to come down together later in the evening to see it.
They were both coming?
They were both coming. They arranged to come together.
Did they both come or not?
No, just one.
Once Christie had murdered his wife and left his job, he was able to dedicate his time purely to murder. He would spend a lot of hours in the Rainbow Cafe on the corner of Rillington Place and found that it would be useful for meeting prostitutes and also potential victims.
John Christie must have had some arrangement whereby he invited the women to Rillington Place if they were prostitutes. Presumably this was part of the normal transaction.
Kathleen was a prostitute in the Ladbroke Grove area, very close to Notting Hill. He invited her around for sex, probably paid her and then took the money back, like he always did. And then he gassed her with his tube, strangled her and raped her.
It is all hazy, is it? Had you any reason or malice to hurt that girl?
No, I did not want to hurt her. I've never hurt anybody.
I ought to ask you about Maloney. When she was dead, what did you do with her body?
Well, I just do not know that.
Well, we know it. Millard and the jury, and all of us know it. It was found in the cupboard in the alcove in the kitchen. You know that now, do you not?
Yes, I was told later that it was, but I do not remember it.
How it got there, you do not know. I don't suppose anybody else could have put it there, but you do not remember it.
It must have been me.
Now, Rita Nelson, her body was found in the cupboard. Do you know how that got there?
I do not remember that alcove at all.
You must have put it there if it was found there. No one else could have done that.
It seems certain that I was, but I do not remember anything about that alcove. I know it was there, but I do not recollect it or having used it.
There were other potential victims too, but they were lucky and managed to escape his attentions just in time. But Christie must have known that this was unsustainable.
I think by this time Christie was self-destructive. He'd given up. He was starting to cave in because he did love his wife. We know that for a fact. And he'd been with her for years and years, and she'd done a lot for him, supporting him. So to kill her really was the final nail in the coffin for him. And the way that he left his final 3 victims as well in the house, he knew they would have been found very quickly.
The bodies began to rot and smell. People complained. Unable to work and without his wife's income, Christie was running out of money. He sold Ethel's wedding ring and her jewelry. Most of the furniture in the flat was gone. Finally, he sold the one thing he had left, his tenancy. He sublet the flat to a couple. Discovery was now inevitable. On the 20th of March, 1953, Christie walked out of 10 Rillington Place with a battered suitcase containing his only belongings. He would never return.
The stink is something quite indescribable. And one of the other tenants noticed the appalling smell in the house. They've got to go through that killing ground to the outside toilet.
The tenant was Beresford Brown, who lived on the top floor and had been allowed to use Christie's dilapidated kitchen. When he was cleaning it up, he discovered the source of the foul stench.
He was re-wallpapering. While he was doing that, he touched the wall and there was a hollow sound and he realized there's nothing behind it. And so he punched through the wallpaper and he saw a woman's back trussed up, and there were 3 women tied up in the kitchen cupboard alcove. And Christie hadn't even sort of nailed down a door or something. He just wallpapered over it. Just shows how panicky he was and how quickly he was trying to get away.
The police are called. Ethel is found under the floorboards. They turn over the garden and they find the bodies of the 2 victims murdered some 10 years before. One of whom, the root of a plant, has actually grown through the vertebrae, and the bones are mixed in with other bones in the garden.
March 1953. John Christie is wandering aimlessly around London. The bodies he's hidden at number 10 Rillington Place have been discovered by the new tenants, and now he's the most wanted man in the country. On the 31st of March 1953, Constable Tom Ledger sees a man in Putney leaning over the railings, staring into the River Thames. He recognizes him as John Christie and immediately arrests him.
Christie was arrested really by chance, early one morning, a foggy morning.
The policeman spots him on Putney Bridge and asks him to take off his hat, and there's the bald dome and the glinting spectacles, and he is arrested.
He had hardly any money left, just a few coins left. It was the end, really. So Christie probably knew he was going to be caught. He probably always wanted to be caught.
What were you doing between the 24th of March and the 31st of March when you were at Putney being arrested?
Well, I just do not recollect, really, what I was doing. I must have been just walking round and round all the time.
You have no recollection at all of what you were doing?
No. I remember one time I was at a crossroad and I think I saw a sign which was strange. It said Barking Road, and then I asked where I was and somebody said I was at East Ham.
Were you deliberately hiding yourself from the police?
No. I was... there was one particular occasion I recall, as though it was yesterday. I was standing, I think, this was after I'd been at East Ham and was on my way back to Kensington. There was a policeman holding the traffic up and beckoned me to go across. I didn't want to go across, but I went across and thanked him as I passed. I went to the other side of the road. I remember that very, very clearly.
Once John Christie was captured, his violent murders would be revealed. When it became clear that he was responsible for the death of Beryl Evans, it was obvious that a huge judicial error had been made and that Timothy Evans could well have been innocent.
The same year that Christie stood trial, another innocent man would be sent to the gallows. Both cases would contribute to the abolition of capital punishment. The other unfortunate individual was 19-year-old Derek Bentley. He and his friend, Christopher Craig, who was 3 years his junior, attempted to carry out a burglary which went horribly wrong.
Derek Bentley was born in 1933, and he was got very limited intelligence. He was friends with Christopher Craig, who suffered badly from dyslexia, and he enjoyed sort of collecting and using guns and knives and such like.
Bentley and Craig plotted to burgle a warehouse belonging to the Barlow and Parker Confectionery Company in Croydon. Craig armed himself with a modified gun, but the plan was thwarted from the off as they were witnessed gaining access to the property via a drain pipe.
Police were called and they climbed up to the roof of the warehouse by various means.
Bentley was quickly arrested, but Craig tried to escape the police and threatened them with a revolver, saying that he would shoot, and in fact he did start shooting. The police were unarmed, and coming out on the roof, one of the policemen, Constable Miles, was killed.
During Craig's shootout with the police, Derek Bentley had already been captured and arrested and was in custody at the time of the murder, but both would find themselves in court.
The law said that if both were involved in a joint enterprise, and as in this case, one of them used a gun to kill, then both were equally guilty. So on that definition, Bentley was guilty of murder, as was Craig.
You got the situation where the person who fired the shot was spared the death penalty because of his age, and the person who had aided and abetted the murder was executed and thereby got a more serious penalty from the law.
Derek Bentley was executed on the 28th of January 1953, and immediately there was a campaign to secure him a posthumous pardon. It would take 4 decades to procure, but in 1993 his pardon was issued. The case of Derek Bentley highlighted the public unease at the use of the death penalty, and many people began to rally against this irreversible form of justice. What the movement needed, though, was a poster girl, and this would come in the form of Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be hanged in Great Britain. Ellis killed her lover, David Blakely, a hard-drinking racing driver. Their on-off relationship was a particularly violent one.
Ruth Ellis, in 1955, was 28 years old. She was described as a rackety, good-time girl. She ran a club in the West End. Ellis had an affair with David Blakely, and it was a sort of rather tempestuous relationship.
She became obsessed with his movements, became very jealous of what he was doing and whether he was involved in other relationships.
This jealousy eventually got the better of her, and on the 10th of April 1955, Ellis travelled to the Magdala Public House in Hampstead with a gun, where she waited for Blakely to leave.
Ellis shot him, brought him down, went up to him and emptied the gun into him as he laid on the ground. She was arrested and taken to a police station and charged with his murder.
There's no doubt that she intended to kill him, so the law was clear.
During those 3 weeks, while public controversy mounted, one man had a terrible decision to make, Home Secretary William Lloyd George. As he went about his public duties, he had to decide whether or not to write the grim words, "The law must take its course." But in the end, he had no choice. As the law stands, and as precedent dictates, Ruth Ellis had to die.
On the 13th of July, 1955, Ruth Ellis was hanged by Albert Pierpoint. There would be no protests or campaigning for the murderous John Christie during the trial at the Old Bailey. Crowds would gather, but not to offer sympathy, only to catch a glimpse of the monster in person. As the word spread of his chilling crimes, 10 Rillington Place, the site where the murders occurred, would also begin to attract crowds. It would not be long before John Christie suffered the full force of the law. But in bringing justice to the victims, grave and fatal flaws would be exposed in both the police force and the British legal system.
On the 31st of March 1953, Police Constable Thomas Ledger arrested the most wanted man in the country. The corpses of 4 women had already been discovered in his house. 2 more victims from far earlier were soon to be found buried in his garden.
Whilst in custody, he began revealing the details of his morbid life story.
Once he was in custody, he was quite quick about confessing. He confessed to 7 murders, but never admitted to the murder of the baby, Geraldine. He would never admit to that. But we are 99.9% sure that he did murder the baby as well.
There are opposing views as to why Christie confessed to murder. Was it an attempt to prove his madness and thus aid his plea of insanity? Nothing is ever clear in the case of John Christie. In an attempt to save John Christie from the noose, his defense team at the trial would argue that Christie was indeed insane. The man defending him was Derek Curtis Bennett. He was a well-known defense barrister. For Curtis Bennett, insanity was the only plausible strategy for excusing the sick and violent crimes Christie had committed. The prosecutor, Sir Lionel Heald, however, didn't have to try too hard to convince the jury of Christie's guilt. All the evidence was stacked against him. It took just 85 minutes for them to decide the verdict.
I think Christie probably had personality disorders rather than being insane. A massive inferiority complex sexually, and like most rapists and murderers of women for sexual motives, he wanted power. And the only time he could get power was with a prostitute or with a dead woman. It's terrible to say, but it was like mannequins for him. It was his way that he could do what he wanted.
Prisoner at the bar, you stand convicted of murder. Have you anything to say before judgment of death is passed according to law?
John Reginald Halliday Christie, you have been found guilty of murder by the jury, and for that crime there is only one sentence known to our law. That you be taken from this place to a lawful prison, and thence to a place of execution, and that there you be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and your body buried in the precincts of the prison in which you shall be last confined before execution. And may the Lord have mercy upon your soul.
John Christie was executed on the 15th of July, 1953 by Albert Pierpoint, the same executioner who'd sent Timothy Evans to his death 3 years earlier.
I think the fact that Timothy Evans had been executed, and it might well have been a miscarriage of justice which could not be corrected, did have an effect on the debate about capital punishment in this country.
It helped lead to the suspension of capital punishment, and the 50s was a terrible time for miscarriages.
Along with the executions of Ruth Ellis and Derek Bentley, the hanging of Timothy Evans played a huge role in the abolition of capital punishment in the UK in 1965. All three murder trials and their accompanying death sentences provoked massive public reaction and were seen as terrible miscarriages of justice, both at the time and today.
I think the whole history of how capital punishment came to be abolished is quite an interesting one. You have some cases where there's clearly an anomaly and some injustice, and you would say Timothy Evans was a miscarriage of justice, and if you have a death penalty, then you can't correct it afterwards.
Timothy Evans eventually received a posthumous pardon, but the controversy around what happened to him changed the country forever. This pardon would be issued in 1966, 16 years after Evans' execution, even though just before his own execution, John Christie had actually confessed to the murder of Timothy's wife, Beryl. It's thought he was responsible for 8 deaths in total. But Christie had been a member of the Wartime Reserve Police in World War II. He would have had many opportunities in that position to carry out murders and cover them up. So, we can never be sure. After John Christie's death, the area where he committed his crimes, Notting Hill, became one of the most fashionable and desirable in the city. It just goes to show that while London might have been home to some of history's most wicked individuals, she always bounces back. As we've seen in this series, the murder maps of London may be dotted with sites where the most horrendous crimes took place. It hasn't stopped her remaining one of the world's great cities.